Many Yuan Chi-formed beasts were getting closer and closer. Oh, the beasts roared like thunder, and more beasts appeared in the sky. Between the mountains, many disciples of Shanjian Gate leaped over the mountains and searched carefully. That Su Yi is hiding nearby. This time, we can't let him escape. That wolf-headed bat disappeared here. Su Yi must be nearby. All the disciples of Shanjian Gate were searching for Su Yi. With so many people surrounding him, no one had found anything. Without a doubt, Su Yi had thoroughly angered everyone. The mystical spiritual fruit and the sword pattern stone were irresistible temptations to the disciples of Shanjian Gate. Today was the opening day of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. All the mystical spiritual fruits were with Su Yi. This made the direct disciples of Shanjian Gate unwilling to give up. At least half of their goal in entering the battlefield of 10,000 swords was to obtain the mystical spiritual fruits. Who would have thought that, in the end, no one would even see the shadow of the mystical spiritual fruits? It was only later that they found out that Su Yi had taken all the mystical spiritual fruits by himself. In the air and on the ground, all the direct disciples were searching carefully. They were determined to find Su Yi even if they had to dig 3 feet into the ground. After the failure of the previous day's encirclement, many of the top disciples of the Sword Pagoda had come to a tacit understanding. Su Yi had the wolf-headed bat as his mount, and no one could surround him alone. They had to work together. Thus, under the leadership of these disciples, they began to set up an encirclement. From all directions, they began to encircle and surround them. A large net had been cast from all directions, and now it was time to reel it in. The inner and outer disciples were also forced to join in. Of course, there were few inner disciples who did not take the initiative. They all hoped to find Su Yi and take revenge. There are so many people. They will be here soon. On the protruding rock in front of the cliff, Situ Muyang came to Su Yi's side. As he watched the encirclement get closer and closer, his expression grew more and more solemn. Situ Muyang looked at Su Yi from the corner of his eye, but found that Su Yi's expression was calm, as if he was not worried at all. Su Yi was calm and indifferent as he looked in front of him. Looking at the large group of figures that were searching for him, his eyes carried a smile. These fellows were really ruthless. They wouldn't stop until they surrounded him. Do you have a way or not? I'm afraid that they will be here soon. Situ Muyang rolled his eyes at Su Yi. He really did not know what Su Yi was up to. Don't worry. They came so quickly, but they will escape even faster. Su Yi smiled mysteriously. His eyes occasionally looked up at the sky, and there was a trace of nervousness in his calm gaze. If you can't escape, they will be the first to come after you. Situ Muyang was helpless. He really could not figure out how Su Yi could escape. Anyway, at this point, even if he wanted to break out now, he could not. He could only wait quietly for Su Yi to open the gourd and see what this guy was up to. Search, he must be inside. The densely packed figures were getting closer and closer, and the encirclement was getting smaller and smaller. They were getting closer and closer to the mountain peak where Su Yi and Situ Muyang were. The crowd was in an uproar. Although Su Yi's name was enough to make the hearts of many disciples tremble. But at this moment, there were so many people here. Almost all the tens of thousands of Shanjian Gate disciples in the battlefield of myriad swords had joined the encirclement. This gave everyone a lot of courage. No matter how strong Su Yi was, could he fight against all the Shanjian Gate disciples? Su Yi, Situ Muyang, they are there. Suddenly, the disciples of the Divine Sword sect discovered 2 silhouettes from afar on the ferocious beast silhouettes formed from the origin chi. Those were their current targets. Su Yi, Situ Muyang, they are there. We finally found them. They are there. Go after them. One by one, they looked in the direction of the gaze. Suddenly, there was a hubbub of voices. They had finally found their targets. A woo, swoosh, swoosh. In an instant, the roars of the beasts were like thunder. The roars shook the sky, and the beasts made of Yuan Chi moved together. Chapter 501. Tens of thousands of Shanjian Gate disciples seemed to be united against a common enemy, shaking the mountains and forests. Their auras gathered together, and the momentum was astonishing. Such a scene was shocking. Oh, whoa! In midair, the figure of the 8-winged demon python appeared. Muyao, who was on its back, had an unsightly expression as she gazed at the figures of Su, Yi, and Sita Muyang in the distance. She said, "Let's see where the two of you can escape to now." "Not good, they have found us." Sita Muyang's face was a little pale. There were so many Shunjian Gate disciples. Even if he had absolute confidence in himself, he knew that it was impossible to deal with so many people. Suki did not have time to raise his head and look above the void. At this moment, his face was a little nervous. He murmured, "It's time. Come quickly, or it will be a big game." "Oh, Suki, this time you can't escape. Let's see where you can escape to." In all directions, the figures were getting closer and closer. The densely packed Yuan energy formed beast figures in the air were even faster. On the backs of each of the Yuan energy formed beast figures were extraordinary young disciples of the Divine Sword sect. At this moment, they were united against a common enemy, and their target was Su Yi. "We are in big trouble, big trouble." Sita Muyang could no longer believe in Su Yi. The Shunjian Gate disciples had already reached the foot of the mountain and were about to come up. This was really big trouble. Su Yi quietly clenched his fists and looked up at the sky from time to time. His indifferent face began to surge with a touch of seriousness. In the early morning, the morning sun rose and the morning glow covered the sky. Suddenly, without knowing when, the bright morning glow gradually dimmed. A black cloud quietly diffused out of the sky and spread out, unknowingly covering the morning sun. This ancient world suddenly began to dim. "Haha, you came at the right time." Su Yi smiled and relaxed his tightly clenched fists. A smile appeared on his face, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. Boom! In this instant, the sky above trembled for no reason. At this moment, the atmosphere between heaven and earth became incomparably oppressive. "What's going on?" When Situ Muyang felt it, his heart trembled for no reason. Even his soul inexplicably trembled. The barbaric beasts in this ancient world seemed to have sensed something. Suddenly, the entire place fell silent. The beasts formed from Yuan Qi under the feet of the personal disciples were also trembling at this moment, their speed greatly reduced. "What's going on?" At this moment, the disciples of Shunjian Gate also felt it. This was especially the case for the strongest direct disciples. Their gazes shifted to the sky at the same time. Above the mountain peak, more and more black clouds appeared, becoming denser and denser. No one could see that on the peak above Su Yi's head, a touch of green and red light pervaded the air, and a carrot the size of a baby appeared. This was the blood jade spirit ginseng. It had just come out from mysterious space. Its dense and thin roots were spreading out at this moment, fluttering in the wind. It was also suffused with a kind of green and red color. There were a few palm-sized green leaves on its head, sparkling and translucent. Its body flickered with light, revealing two lifelike eyes, solemnly staring at the dark clouds in the sky. "What's going on?" "There seems to be a huge pressure. Something's not right. What's going on?" One by one, the disciples of Shunjian Gate froze in place. This inexplicable movement, accompanied by an invisible and astonishing pressure, caused their souls to tremble uncontrollably. They suddenly did not dare to casually approach. Everyone's gazes involuntarily shifted to the sky, feeling the direction of the movement's origin. "It's Su Yi. Is he behind this?" Everyone looked into the distance, feeling the astonishing aura, and immediately suspected Su Yi. The place where the astonishing aura came from was where Su Yi was. Buzz, above the sky, thick black clouds were vast and mighty, and electric arcs appeared quietly, illuminating the dusky world. In an instant, the world changed greatly. The entire sky was occupied by dazzling thunderclouds, and a kind of thunder and lightning pressure pervaded the air. Not good. In an instant, the hearts of all the people and savage beasts in this ancient world throbbed, and a chill ran down their spines. "Oh, whoa! Read the original chapter. On the festival, $2 cool G craftsman. The savage beasts in this battlefield of 10,000 swords also felt it, and the roars of beasts came from afar. In the forest, there were fierce, savage beasts, whose fierce eyes were like copper bells, looking at the distant void, trembling all over. Thunderclouds. Why are there thunderclouds? F***CK, what's going on? Is it Su Yi's doing? Eyes trembled as they looked at the void, and their figures involuntarily trembled. On the phantom of a four-winged earth-fire beast, there was a young man in his 20s. He had a slender figure, sharp eyebrows, a high-nosed bridge, and thin lips. A pair of pitch-black eyes were filled with red light, looking at the thunderclouds in the distant void, and a light flashed in his eyes. Lei Wei, could it be? On the back of the eight-winged demonic python, Mu Yao's orange clothes fluttered, and her face changed greatly. The phantom of a white spiritual horse, with a pair of wings on its back, was vigorous, and its whole body was shining. On it, there was a charming woman with her black hair dancing, and her eyes shining. There was a huge phantom of a butterfly, and its wings were filled with electric arcs. When it flapped its wings, it seemed to be filled with lightning. On it, there was a young man with long black hair, looking at the flashing lightning in the sky, and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. "Are we in trouble?" Sita Muyang exclaimed. At this moment, they could feel the mighty aura, and it made them tremble with fear. Their hair stood on end, and their souls were restless. Zizizi, on the mountain peak, the thunderclouds were getting thicker and thicker. The blood jasper spirit Ginseng's body began to emit a green and red light. It stood with its head held high, and the green leaves on its head suddenly expanded, bursting with a kind of power. It also emitted a kind of medicinal fragrance. If people smelled it, it would make them salivate. Zizizi, soon, from the thunderclouds, one after another, bright lightning flashed, as if connecting the sky and the earth, and directly fell on the blood jasper spirit Ginseng, accompanied by a mighty pressure. Rumble. The sound of thunder was unceasing. With the blood jasper spirit Ginseng as the center, the lightning was like a volcanic eruption. It was endless, and it came from all directions, crazily surging and crazily descending. This was a tribulation, not an ordinary lightning, but a punishment from the heavens. From all directions, this shocking scene made everyone's hair stand on end, and their souls tremble. What is that, Run? Not good. This is the initial tribulation. There is a heaven and earth spirit or a barbaric demonic beast crossing the tribulation. Run, run. This is a tribulation. We can't touch it. It will provoke karma. Run. There was a loud shout, and some disciples felt that something was wrong. That was a tribulation, and if anyone was touched by it, even if they didn't die, they would be affected by karma. Run, run. Chapter 502. Lightning bolts fell from the sky. Even though they were separated by a great distance, they were already suffocating. The terrifying power of the thunder made people's hair stand on end, their hearts turn cold, and their hair stand on end. Hearing someone shout, the disciples recovered from their shock and immediately fled. Some of the disciples were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. The majestic thunder and lightning aura brought with it the pressure of heaven and earth, as if it wanted to destroy everything. The disciples who were scared could only crawl and roll away. Frightened and panicked, they cried for their parents everywhere. Run, run quickly. Help! What the hell is going on? The sound of thunder, crying for their parents, and horrified voices mixed together and resounded through this ancient world. The beasts formed by the Yuan Shi under the feet of the direct disciples were all frightened and disappeared at this moment. Go! When the thunder and lightning fell, Su Yi returned to the crack in the cliff. The light between his eyebrows shone, and he called out the mysterious space and hid inside it. This was the blood jasper spirit Ginseng's tribulation again. Surrounded by all the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, Su Yi also remembered that the blood jasper spirit Ginseng was about to undergo tribulation again. Calculating the time, he might as well summon everyone. Suki did not want to use this opportunity to kill these Shunjian Gate disciples, but he had no other choice. Moreover, the blood jasper spirit ginseng was about to undergo tribulation, and these disciples could escape. Suyi's goal was to escape successfully. Situ Muyang entered the mysterious space, under the pressure of the thunder and lightning. Although he entered the mysterious space immediately, he was still in a state of shock. His gaze was fixed on Su-yi. His throat moved, and he was somewhat speechless. Boss Su-yi, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others all woke up at this moment. They were puzzled when they saw Su-yi suddenly enter and quickly leave. However, at this moment, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others' auras were clearly stronger than before they had consumed the mystical spirit fruit. Su-yi's gaze swept across the group. Lu Ji, Zhang Qing, and the others' auras couldn't escape Su-yi's prying. The most shocking one was Su Jiahui, who was already at the 5th level of the Origin Profound Realm. With Su Jiahui's age, she had already reached the 5th level of the Origin Profound Realm. This was already shocking enough. Su-yi still remembered that when he was in Barbarian City, Sacred Mountain's Ji Chao had just reached the 1st level of the Yuan Profound Realm. In comparison, the current Su Jiahui was already terrifying enough. However, Su-yi was well aware that Su Jiahui's progress had far surpassed that of Ji Chao back on the Sacred Mountain. That was because of the mysterious space, the spirit liquid, and the effects of the mystical spirit fruit. How many people in the world would have such an opportunity to transform consecutively? Su-yi estimated that once they left the myriad sword battlefield, Su Jiahui would be able to attract the attention of the entire Shenzhen Gate. Zhang Qing followed closely behind Su Jiahui and was already at the 4th level of the Origin Profound Realm. Although Lu Ji and the others' foundations were slightly weaker, they had already broken through 2 levels and reached the 3rd level of the Origin Profound Realm. Mu Yong, Jujo T, exempt equals Phi J, CK 0 novel 0. Several people looked at Su-yi with grateful gazes. They knew very well what they had obtained. It was an opportunity that they didn't even dare to dream of. Only a small number of direct disciples were able to obtain the mystical spirit fruit, and the spirit liquid was an unimaginable treasure. All of this was because of this youth in ragged clothes, who seemed to be in a sorry state, but had an arrogant temperament. How could they not be grateful? Because of this youth, they were able to transform and change their destinies. Could it be that the blood jasper spirit ginseng was undergoing tribulation? At this moment, Situ Muyang, who was still in shock, regained his senses. He still remembered that the blood jasper spirit ginseng was about to undergo tribulation in this mysterious space. Furthermore, he seemed to have brought out something when he entered this space. It should be the blood jasper spirit ginseng. He nodded. He wasn't worried about the Shenzhen Gate disciples, but he was worried about the blood jasper spirit ginseng. Previously, the blood jasper spirit ginseng failed to undergo tribulation. This time, it could try again, but if it failed again, the consequences would be severe. I see, huh? Situ Muyang laughed. At this moment, he finally understood what Su-yi was trying to sell. It turned out that this guy had already calculated that he would attract all the Shenzhen Gate disciples and let the blood jasper spirit ginseng undergo tribulation. Perhaps none of the Shenzhen Gate disciples would have thought that Su-yi would come back with such a trick. Under this tribulation, no one could stop it. All of them were scared out of their wits and could only flee in panic. Thinking of the last scene, when he saw the Shenzhen Gate disciples running away in panic and crying for their parents, Situ Muyang looked at Su-yi again. The worship in his eyes was even stronger, and he admired him so much that he wanted to prostrate himself in front of him. Being surrounded by all the disciples of the Sword God sect was probably unprecedented in the history of the Shenzhen Gate. However, he deliberately attracted all the disciples of the Shenzhen Gate and played with them one by one. Finally, he could make all of them run away, crying for their parents. Who else could do this? Rumble, in this mountain range, Large amounts of thunder and lightning constantly fell, blowing up the surrounding mountains and destroying everything. The thunder and lightning around the blood jasper spirit ginseng was the most concentrated. The thunder and lightning struck the blood jasper spirit ginseng with mighty pressure. The seemingly fragile emerald green leaf on the top of its head broke out a strange power and directly resisted. Thunder and lightning covered the blood jasper spirit ginseng, and electric arcs raged. However, at this moment, the blood jasper spirit ginseng's body was surging with light, faintly carrying a destructive and majestic aura. This aura was somewhat similar to the aura in the mysterious space. It could directly obliterate the power of these electric arcs and then devour them. Above the sky, rolling thunderclouds surged, as if they had been provoked. An extremely terrible thunder and lightning suddenly emerged, and then filled the sky. All of the divine sword sect's disciples had already retreated in all directions. Most of the disciples were crawling and rolling as they escaped, running far, far away. Looking at the terrible thunder and lightning falling, their throats rolled, and they swallowed their saliva. Their souls were throbbing. If they had fled a little slower, they would have been struck by the thunder and lightning and turned into charcoal. In the distance, on the top of the mountain, the 8-winged demonic python was trembling all over. It crawled on the ground, curled up, and trembled all over. Its fierce eyes were filled with fear. Mu Yao's eyes flickered as she stared into the distance with a shocked expression. She could feel the terrifying pressure of the lightning, even though they were separated by space. She muttered softly, "A spiritual being of heaven and earth is actually undergoing a tribulation." Not far away, on the top of the mountain, many outstanding disciples of the Shunjian Gate gathered. Looking at the thunder and lightning in the distance, they were all trembling with fear. There is a spiritual creature of heaven and earth, or a savage demonic beast going through the tribulation. This is also an opportunity. Once the spiritual creature of heaven and earth, or a savage demonic beast fails, it will be our chance. Even if it succeeds, it will be extremely weak for a short period of time. This is a great opportunity. Once we get it, it will be a great fortune. Chapter 503. They didn't dare to touch this tribulation, nor could they resist it. However, regardless of whether the tribulation was a success or failure, it was a great opportunity for them. Rumble, in the distant sky, thunderclouds surged wildly. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Bolts of lightning fell like angry pythons. At this time, the entire morning was dark. Only the dazzling lightning and thunder filled everything. It was like the end of the world. Bolts of lightning shot out from the thunderclouds like silver pythons. Then they tore through the space and descended with terrifying sounds. In the distant void, a multicolored light spread. A 5-colored elk quietly floated in the air, looking at the distant lightning. Its eyes flickered, but it didn't dare to get close. It should be over soon. Whether it succeeds or fails, we'll know the results soon. In the distance, many shocked gazes also surged with a hint of passion. On the mountain peak, bolts of lightning fell continuously. The blood jasper spirit ginseng's body was surrounded by electric arcs, and there were also many scattered lightning bolts that fell on the ground and mountains around, destroying everything. The mountain rocks collapsed, and cracks covered the mountain and the ground. Thunder rumbled endlessly. Rumble. The surrounding mountains were also enveloped. Mountains collapsed and the ground cracked. The earth shook and rocks fell in torrents. The scene was extremely terrifying. The strange thing was that the mountain peak where the lightning was the densest was densely covered in lightning. It was like an indestructible boulder. No one saw that although lightning fell, it seemed to have intelligence and didn't fall around the mountain peak at all. "Grandpa Ginseng, you must hold on." In the mysterious space, he had no way of knowing the situation outside. He could only pray that the blood jasper spirit ginseng could successfully pass the tribulation. Can the blood jasper spirit ginseng pass the tribulation successfully? It said that tribulations aren't easy to pass. The blood jasper spirit ginseng can already speak, so it should have passed the initial tribulation. If it passes the tribulation successfully, it will be a demonic emperor. Situmyang said softly to himself. He was shocked. Demonic emperor was an absolute powerhouse in this world. Initial tribulation. Grandpa Ginseng failed the previous tribulation. This is another tribulation, Su Yi told Situmyang. What is tribulation? Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others were puzzled. They had no idea what was going on outside. With their status, there were many things that they didn't know. They couldn't come into contact with people of that level. When heaven and earth spiritual beings and savage demonic beasts reach the demonic illusionary realm, they will be obstructed by tribulations. If they can withstand it, they will exist in this world. If they can't, they will vanish into thin air. There were many kinds of tribulations, and it was said that each kind was stronger than the last. The cardinal tribulation was only the first tribulation for savage beasts and spiritual beings to step into the ethereal demon realm. After stepping into the ethereal demon realm, they would receive the protection of the heavens and earth and would be able to speak the human language. Only 1 out of 100 savage beasts and spiritual beings of heaven and earth would be able to successfully pass the trial. If they fail, their cultivation would regress, and it would be extremely difficult for them to advance any further. In the worst case, they would be severely injured or even turned into ashes, Situmyang informed Zhang Qing and Su Jiahui. He knew far more than them. If that's the case, savage demonic beasts and spiritual beings of heaven and earth have a much harder time cultivating than us humans. Hearing that, Zhang Qing and the others secretly clicked their tongues. They didn't expect that those seemingly powerful savage demonic beasts and spiritual beings of heaven and earth would have to face tribulations obstructing their path of cultivation. They were extremely dangerous and difficult to pass. You're overthinking things. Be it humans, savage beasts, or spiritual beings of heaven and earth, cultivation is a heaven-defying path. In the end, they will all be obstructed by tribulations. It's just that the tribulations that human warriors need to transcend are still too early for us. If we could take that step one day, we will naturally know the tribulations we need to transcend. Situmyang said with a yearning look in his eyes. If he could reach the step of transcending tribulations, it would prove that he could become a top expert. Is that so? Su, he was a little puzzled. It was just transcending tribulations. When he cultivated the heavenly, fey, ancient scripture, he had attracted a tribulation. That lightning seemed to be much stronger than Grandpa Ginseng's tribulation. Chila. At that moment, the space fluctuated. A figure of light rushed in and smashed into the ground where the medicinal herbs were planted. At the same time, an excited voice that could not be concealed sounded. The tribulation is over. I need a few days to recover. Kid, leave quickly. Don't attract attention. It's a success. When the voice entered his ears, Su Yi was overjoyed. He immediately waved his sleeve and said, "Let's go. Quick." On the distant mountain peak, the shocking lightning slowly disappeared and the thunderclouds dispersed. Did he succeed or fail? Everyone's eyes were filled with lingering fear. Whoosh, whoosh. At the same time, many figures rushed out. The energy under their feet transformed into beast shadows and rushed up in search of the great opportunity. You, cool craftsman, premier, Xinjiang Gate. The mountains were majestic, covered in lush greenery. Clouds and mist lingered around them, spreading out in a spectacular sight. In the early morning, the majestic mountains were faintly discernible in the clouds. Ancient trees towered into the sky, and red walls and yellow tiles were revealed among the lush greenery. The energy of heaven and earth was abundant everywhere. Vaguely, there seemed to be the sound of guqin and the tinkling of bells, making one feel as if they were in a fairyland. The 36th Sword Peak was cold and cheerless. A short figure landed on the 36th Sword Peak. Although the figure was short, his face was slightly old. He seemed to be in his 60s or 70s. There were faint wrinkles on his face, as if they were traces left behind by the passage of time. However, the outline of his face was very three-dimensional. One could vaguely see that he must have been quite handsome when he was young. However, the figure was too short, like a child of 8 or 9 years old. He was only half the height of an ordinary person. The short old man's long robe fit him extremely well. A third of his black hair was mixed with white hair. His gaze moved slightly, calm and deep, like an ancient well without ripples. He murmured softly, "The exit of the battlefield of myriad swords should be open." As his voice fell, the old man did not seem to have any intention of going to the exit. He walked into the courtyard. After all, the Myriad Sword Conference had nothing to do with the 36 Sword Peak. The exit of the battlefield of 10,000 swords was in a vast square surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. Whoosh whoosh. Early in the morning, there were older disciples of Shunjian Gate who came to set up and wait. Then there were protectors who came. Figures with powerful auras landed one after another. Each protector's eyes were filled with anticipation and expectation. For the protectors of Shunjian Gate, everyone knew that this Myriad Sword Conference was not only about Shunjian Gate, but also related to the future of the entire Shunjian Gate. In addition, many of these protectors had their own interests at stake. Chapter 504. It's almost time. I wonder if Protector Ho has prepared all the pills for his loss. Ha! Protector Wang Tianbao couldn't help but laugh in the crowd. He had finally tricked Ho Changming, who told him to act all high and mighty. He would be heartbroken later. I heard that Protector Ho went to exchange for pills a few days ago. Could it be that he doesn't have confidence in himself and knows that he is going to lose? A protector who looked to be in his 50s also joked. He had also placed a bet. Although the odds were very low, this was equivalent to winning a bet. He didn't want to miss out. Winning some pills for his disciple wasn't a bad idea either. It's not the end yet. If you win, you will get your share of the pills. Protector Ho Changming spoke. How could he not know that his new disciple appeared to have ordinary talent and was originally only an outer disciple? If it wasn't a miracle among miracles, even he himself would not believe that his new disciple was able to stand out from thousands of inner disciples in the Myriad Sword battlefield and enter the top 68. Protector Ho Changming ran to the side as soon as he finished speaking. He couldn't be bothered to stay with these people. Protector Ho Changming had taken out all his assets and exchanged them for all kinds of high-tier pills. He was almost in debt. However, he couldn't take back what he had said. After all, Lin Fan was his new disciple. The worst-case scenario was that Lin Fan could come out of the Myriad Sword battlefield safely. Thank you in advance, Protector Ho. Haha. Protector Zhu Changgao and the others laughed. They could tell that Protector Ho Changming was stubborn. However, the protectors didn't continue to stare at Protector Ho Changming. The exit would open soon, and the personal disciples and inner disciples would come out. This Myriad Sword Conference was more important than the previous ones. I wonder which disciples got the mystical spiritual fruit this time. Treasures like the mystical spirit fruit were hard to come by. Coincidentally, the mystical spirit fruit that could only be harvested once every 15 years had been found by this group of disciples. It was also a stroke of luck, and no one knew which disciples would be able to obtain it. Those who can get the mystical spiritual fruit are probably those guys. A protector estimated that those who could get the mystical spiritual fruit were those who ranked high in the Sword Pagoda. The others couldn't compete with them. I wonder if there will be any dark horses this time? A beautiful middle-aged woman spoke. Every Myriad Sword Conference was, in fact, a special test for all the disciples. Often, there would be some ordinary disciples who would appear out of nowhere and perform amazingly. I look forward to it. Some of the protectors were also looking forward to it. Every time the Myriad Sword Conference was held, there would always be some disciples who would suddenly perform amazingly. I wonder if everyone still remembers Su Yi. Suddenly, a faint voice sounded from among the protectors. Su Yi, that's Su Yi from the 36 Sword Peak. Su Yi, that disciple seems to be an unforeseen event. I wonder where Elder Su brought him back. Hearing Su Yi's name, all the guardians were secretly moved. Su Yi's performance was too amazing. Although they didn't know if the heaven-reaching platform had malfunctioned, it was enough to shock everyone. Although the heaven-reaching platform has malfunctioned, Su Yi was able to defeat the 11th sword. It has already proven that he is extraordinary. This time, it shouldn't be a problem for him to enter the top 68. A protector said, even if the heaven-reaching platform had malfunctioned, Su Yi could only reach the 7th level. However, Su Yi's victory over the 11th sword was real. With such cultivation strength, it shouldn't be a problem for him to enter the top 68 with enough sword pattern stones. Look at main 3 chapter equals section on G hashtag. If Su Yi can enter the top 68, it will be the first time in 100 years that a disciple from the 36 Sword Peak has entered the top 68 in the Myriad Sword Conference. A protector said. Hearing this, the protectors smiled knowingly. In the past 100 years, the Myriad Sword Conference had never seemed to have anything to do with the 36 Sword Peak. That's not necessarily true. Su Yi seems to have offended many disciples, especially those from the 15th Sword Peak. I don't know what will happen when he enters the Myriad Sword battlefield. A protector said faintly. The 15th Sword Peak. Suddenly, many protectors' expressions changed. The news that Su Yi had defeated many disciples from the 15th Sword Peak had already spread. And everyone knew that the 15th Sword Peak had a personal disciple who was not to be trifled with. They were all young people. Young people were hot-blooded and competitive. They would definitely clash in the Myriad Sword battlefield. Whoosh, whoosh. Above the void, there was an aura fluctuation. Many figures descended. Waves of invisible aura fluctuations caused the entire space to quietly freeze. Greetings, elders. Everyone bowed, and the protectors looked respectful. It was a group of elders. This Myriad Sword Conference was more significant than usual in Shunjian Gate, and the Shunjian Gate attached great importance to it. Many elders descended, and there were many familiar figures among them. Elder Yu Chanqing, Elder Lu Baimei, Elder Mei Huaye, Elder Duan Yurong, Elder Shangwan Hu, and the others were among them. The group of elders descended and looked at the area between the mountain streams in front of the square. That was the place where the exit would open. This Myriad Sword Conference was extraordinary. I hope everything will go smoothly, Elder Yu Chanqing said. His thin cheeks were full of wrinkles, as if he had experienced the vicissitudes of life. His long eyebrows and white beard fluttered behind him, giving him a somewhat sage-like temperament. But at this moment, Elder Yu Chanqing's face was full of nervousness. Every time in the Myriad Sword battlefield, there would be accidents. It wasn't a strange thing for a personal disciple to die in the process. Elder Yu Chanqing also had disciples in there, and he hoped that no accidents would happen in the Myriad Sword battlefield. Open the exit, Elder Lu Baimei said. His black hair was tied up in a bun, and there wasn't a single strand of hair out of place. Under his silver eyebrows, his slightly sunken eye sockets revealed his deep brown eyes. It was obvious that he was quite nervous. The continuous mountain range was like a giant dragon circling. Boom! Suddenly, there was a rumble between the mountain range, followed by a tremor that shook the entire Myriad Sword battlefield. A ray of light rushed out like a sun, and a huge spatial portal appeared. The spatial portal is open. Several figures rushed out quickly. Looking at the space transfer gate that appeared, a smile appeared on their faces. These people were none other than Su Yi, Situmuyang, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others. Just in time. Let's go out. Chapter 505. However, these were only outer court disciples. There were no inner court disciples. Situmuyang reckoned that those inner court disciples and direct disciples had all been cheated by Su Yi. Take these space bags. There are some gains from the battlefield of 10,000 swords and sword pattern stones inside. Whether you can be qualified to ascend the spiritual sword peak in the end will depend on yourselves. In front of the space portal, Su Yi's figure paused. He took out a lot of space bags and handed them to Situmuyang, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others. So many sword pattern stones, and Damn, I'm rich. Sitamuyong immediately took the space bags and checked them. These space bags had no obstacles and could be opened directly. He was stunned and wild with joy. 45 sword-patterned stones, a lot of elixirs, and other cultivation resources. Several space bags were piled up. Although Sitamuyong had seen good things since he was young, these were the gains from the battlefield of 10,000 swords. They represented his achievements in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. The quality was different. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others did not even have space bags with them. They had seen space bags before, but at this moment, they were a little unfamiliar with opening them. However, in the end, they opened them smoothly. So many, seeing everything in the space bags compared to Sitamuyong, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, Tan Chao, and Wang Fan were even more shocked at this moment. In the space bags that Su Yi gave to Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others, there were more than 10 sword pattern stones each. As for whether they could enter the top 68, they could only wait and see. Su Yi also knew that although Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Wang Fan, and the others' cultivation had skyrocketed and their bones and marrow had been cleansed, their true strength was far from enough to fight in the final battle of the Myriad Sword Conference. Su Yi had given them the sword pattern stones so that they could perform well at the Myriad Sword Conference. At that time, if Su Jiahui and the others could catch the eye of some elders, it would be beneficial for them as well. Moreover, the sword pattern stone had an important use and could be exchanged for points. Su Yi had given quite a bit of everything he had obtained from the Myriad Sword battlefield to Su Jiahui and the others. With these cultivation resources, it was enough for Su Jiahui and the others to cultivate in peace. Come on, let's get out of here first. Su Yi spoke. Zhang Qing, Su Jiahui, and the others weren't that fast. The teleportation gate had already been opened, and the personal disciples would immediately catch up to them. Come on, let's get out of here first. Sitamuyong kept the interspatial bag. Under the astonished gazes of many people around them, the group walked directly into the portal. Isn't that Su Yi? It's him. It can't be wrong. Is that Sitamuyong next to him? Didn't everyone go to surround them? Why did they come to the exit? Could that terrifying scene just now have something to do with Su Yi? Many outer sect disciples were stunned. Tens of thousands of disciples, and all the personal disciples couldn't even surround 2 people? At the Xinjiang Gate, on the square surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, a teleportation gate opened. Rumble, the void fluctuated, and a dazzling light distorted the void. Waves of aura spread out. There were many disciples, protectors, and elders of the Xinjiang Gate around. At this moment, all of them were looking at the exit of the teleportation gate with anticipation in their eyes. There were many people present, and they were all disciples of the 36 Sword Peaks. Although the Myriad Sword Conference was the Myriad Sword Conference of the entire Xinjiang Gate, there were also competitions among the various Sword Peaks of the Xinjiang Gate. Of course, in reality, everyone only thought that the 35 Sword Peaks were secretly competing. This was because the 36th Sword Peak had always been included in the calculations. I wonder who will be the first to come out this time. It should be Ryugan River, Yinling Feng, and those terrifying guys. I wonder who will have the most sword pattern stones. Many disciples were discussing, and even some protectors were whispering to each other. Everyone was guessing which disciple would be the first to come out, and which disciple would have the most sword pattern stones. To a certain extent, the first disciple to come out could also represent his strength. The strongest disciple was more likely to have the most sword pattern stones. In the Myriad Sword battlefield, those disciples might have already clashed with each other. There should be some dark horses emerging, someone said softly. According to the situation of the previous Myriad Sword conferences, there would be fierce battles for the sword pattern stones and the competition for all kinds of opportunities and creations, and even before the exit opened. It should be known that the age of the personal disciples was also at the peak of their youth. They were usually unconvinced, and it was inevitable that they would clash with each other. However, at this moment, if these people knew that in this Myriad Sword Conference, there would not be any fights for the sword pattern stones, let alone the various opportunities. Everyone was swarming around Su E, looking for Su E from head to toe. One could only wonder what they would think. Protector Ho Changming stood alone at the side. He seemed to be careless, but in fact his eyes were intentionally or unintentionally glancing at the exit of the space portal. He was secretly nervous. Look, someone is coming out. Finally, a figure appeared in the space portal. Suddenly, all eyes were on the exit. For no reason, some people began to feel nervous. Deep in their hearts, everyone naturally hoped that the first to come out would be the disciple from their sword peak. Swoosh, swoosh. Under the expectant gazes, several figures appeared at the exit of the space portal. It was as if they were being chased by something, and all of them appeared in a hurry. The figures were blurry, but they soon got closer and clearer. Cool. English under the expectant gazes. The first to come out was obviously not the person that everyone was expecting. It was not even one of those extraordinary figures that everyone was familiar with. To everyone's eyes, the first few figures that came out seemed to be unfamiliar. It seems to be Su E. Elder Yu Changqing's thin and wrinkled face was a little surprised. He recognized the figure at the very front. The symbol was very eye-catching. It's Su E, that kid. Elder Shangwan, whose eyes moved. His obsidian-like black pupils flashed with an awe-inspiring, heroic aura. His sharp eyes reflected the several figures. How could he not recognize that brat? Su E, it's that Su E. This guy is actually the first to come out. There are a few unfamiliar people. They seem to be outer disciples. When they saw the figure of the leading young man, everyone was surprised. Chapter 506. Who else could it be other than Su E with a sword and a saber on his back? No one had expected that Su E would be the first to run out of the exit. What was even more unexpected was that there were actually a few outer court disciples who were the first to walk out of the exit. In particular, many people were still guessing what would happen to Su E in the Myriad Sword battlefield. There would definitely be people who would not let Su E off. But now, Su E was the first to run out of the spatial portal. Although his clothes were tattered and his hair was disheveled, he seemed to be completely fine and seemed to be in high spirits. The entire place was stunned, and the atmosphere was very strange. But at this moment, someone's eyes suddenly lit up. Cool. Craftsman VNet 9P Young H GOZ equals free look / little 0. Say equals protector. Ho Changming intentionally or unintentionally glanced at the exit. When he saw a familiar figure among the several figures that walked out, his gaze immediately locked onto that figure. Immediately, Ho Changming's eyes moved inwardly. That figure was the new disciple he had casually accepted in the Myriad Sword battlefield. At this moment, his disciple was actually the first to walk out of the exit. The group of elders were all secretly moved. Among the group of elders, an old man who looked to be in his 60s and had a medium build looked at the numerous figures walking out of the exit. His expression was somewhat indifferent, and a light flashed in his eyes. There seems to be that little fellow as well. Why is he walking together with Su E? Strange, that little fellow is actually walking together with that brat Su E. Among the group of elders, some of the elders' gazes landed on Sitamuyang, and their expressions were rather strange. We're out, haha. When he stepped out of the spatial portal, Sitamuyang was extremely excited. Once he walked out of the spatial portal, he would be completely out of the Myriad Sword battlefield. Even if all the direct disciples caught up, they would not be able to do anything to them. Walking out of the teleportation gate, Su E glanced around and saw many familiar figures. He secretly heaved a sigh of relief. With this, not only did Su E no longer have to worry about being surrounded by his personal disciples, more importantly, he actually managed to bring out the Xianyang Golden Demon Falcon and the Wolf Bat from the mysterious space in his mind. Are we the first to come out? Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Wang Fan, and the others were also very happy. They looked around as if they were still in a daze. After spending a month in the Myriad Sword battlefield, they could be considered to have safely exited. As for the mysterious space, Su Jiahui and the others had no idea how exciting it was when Su E and Sitamuyang were besieged by tens of thousands of disciples of Shunjian Gate. Just how shocking was the lightning brought about by the first tribulation. There seems to be something wrong with the atmosphere. Is no one welcoming us? Sita Muyang pursed her lips. She felt that there was something wrong with the atmosphere, but she could not tell what it was. A group of outer sect disciples. Which sword peak are they from? These outer sect disciples seem to have a good relationship with Su Yi. Are they all from the 36th sword peak? On the various sword peaks, some of the older disciples of Shunjian Gate were secretly discussing. A group of outer sect disciples actually took the lead and walked out. They had all entered the myriad sword battlefield before and knew that there were many fights at the exit. The top disciples of the Sword Pagoda would all fight. It was absolutely impossible for outer sect disciples to take the lead and walk out. Outer sect disciples did not have the courage to do so. Boss Su Yi, I saw my master. I'll go see him first. While Zhang Qing was looking around excitedly, he saw Protector Ho Changming, who was not too far away. That was his master. Zhang Qing wanted to pay him a visit. It's my duty. Go ahead. Su Yi also saw Protector Ho Changming and had a good impression of this protector. Zhang Qing was very excited. He had become Guardian Ho's disciple and gained a lot in the myriad sword battlefield. He was definitely the happiest person in the past 20 years. Disciple Zhang Qing pays his respects to master. Zhang Qing took 2 steps and walked to Guardian Ho Changming. He knelt down respectfully and saluted. It's Guardian Ho Changming's disciple. Everyone was astonished. At this moment, when Zhang Qing bowed in front of Ho Changming, it naturally attracted a lot of attention and made people feel astonished. Is that Guardian Ho's disciple? He seems to be ordinary. Guardian Wang Tianbao, Guardian Zhu Changgao, and the others were even more surprised. It turned out that Zhang Qing was Guardian Ho Changming's disciple in the myriad sword battlefield. He looked ordinary and did not seem to be eye-catching. However, they were envious of his disciple because he was the first to walk out of the spatial portal. He seems to be extraordinary. However, the Guardians' eyes were sharp. When their gazes were focused on Zhang Qing's body, they felt that this ordinary-looking disciple seemed to have an unusual temperament. Protector Ho Changming watched as his disciple walked out of the spatial portal first. Not only did this make him feel relieved, but also made him, the master, stand in the limelight unknowingly. He was already very satisfied in his heart. Guardian Ho Changming also noticed that his new disciple's aura had obviously reached the Yuan Profound Realm. He seemed to have reached the 4th level of the Yuan Profound Realm. One must know that a month ago, his disciple was only at the Yuan Soul Realm and was still far from the Yuan Profound Realm. This meant that Zhang Qing's cultivation had increased by an entire realm in a month's time. How terrifying was this? No one would believe it if he told it to others. More importantly, Guardian Ho Changming felt that his disciple's aura and temperament were completely different from a month ago. They could not be mentioned in the same breath. A month ago, the feeling that this disciple gave him was that he was ordinary and there was nothing outstanding about him. However, at this moment, this disciple seemed to be ordinary. But when he looked at him carefully, his eyes lit up. His eyes, muscles, bones, and formless aura seemed to have undergone a metamorphosis. It was as if his bones and marrow had been cleansed. So, this is Guardian Ho's new disciple. A figure stepped forward. Many guardians walked over, and their gazes fell on Zhang Qing. After all, they had already placed their bets. Even if they won, they would not win much. It was only 10 celestial high-tier elixir pills. For their status, it was not a big deal. However, it was rare to see Guardian Ho Changming suffer. Such an opportunity was rare. The Guardians' gazes fell on Zhang Qing as they were secretly moved. They couldn't deny that Ho Changming's new disciple didn't look impressive, but he shouldn't be simple. For an outer sect disciple to have such an aura, it gave off an unknowingly extraordinary aura. Get up. Chapter 507. Yes, Master. Zhang Qing stood up and looked at the group of protectors. He immediately bowed and said, Disciple Zhang Qing greets the protectors. After cleansing his bones and marrow and refining his body with the mysterious space spirit liquid, Zhang Qing had transformed from the inside out. His attitude was neither servile nor overbearing. He was respectful but fearless. Looking at his disciple's performance, Ho Changming smiled inwardly. He liked him more and more. Judging from a performance of this new disciple, Ho Changming felt that he had gained something else from losing the elixir today. In the future, this disciple might really have some achievements. K5 Most DJ New Q Chapter Q Part C. The group of protectors looked at Zhang Qing, and they were all secretly moved. Could such a disciple really be an outer sect disciple? Why didn't anyone notice him? Okay, Zhang Qing, how many sword pattern stones did you get in the battlefield of 10,000 swords? Wang Tianbao stepped forward. This was what he was most concerned about. It seemed that Ho Changming had indeed accepted a good disciple, but he had definitely lost a bet. How could an outer sect disciple have sword pattern stones? Even if he had accidentally obtained them, with the strength of an outer sect disciple, they would have been taken away by the inner sect disciples and direct disciples. Seeing that a protector was asking, Zhang Qing immediately looked at Ho Changming nervously. After all, the sword pattern stones he had were all given to him by Boss Su Yi. If he relied on himself, he wouldn't be able to walk out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Seeing Zhang Qing's reaction, the protectors smiled inwardly. They thought that Zhang Qing was nervous because he didn't have a single sword pattern stone. They had already won. Moreover, they knew from the beginning that Ho Changming was definitely going to lose. Seeing Zhang Qing's reaction, Ho Changming felt helpless. How could an outer sect disciple have a sword pattern stone? Fortunately, they had lost the bet. At least this disciple seemed to be good. Ho Changming said indifferently, if you have one, just tell the protectors. If you don't, it doesn't matter. The tempering of the battlefield of 10,000 swords is meant to be of great benefit to you in the future. Hearing Ho Changming's words, many protectors laughed inwardly. It seemed that Ho Changming couldn't take it anymore. Zhang Qing looked at his master's expression and gritted his teeth. He summoned his courage and took out a space bag. He took out a large number of sword pattern stones and said bravely, Master, disciple is incompetent. I only obtained 13 sword pattern stones. Numerous gazes landed on Zhang Qing's palm. Suddenly, their expressions changed drastically. The expressions on the protectors' faces were as if they were choking on something hard to swallow. Protector Ho Changming originally had a look of hopelessness on his face. When he looked at the sword grainstone in Zhang Qing's hand, he was stunned for a few breaths. Only then did he react. His old face suddenly surged with uncontrollable joy. Are these sword pattern stones real? Zhu Changgao stepped forward. His expression changed. He took a sword pattern stone from Zhang Qing's hand and began to examine it. He couldn't believe that an outer sect disciple had obtained 13 sword pattern stones. Zhu Changgao's expression froze when he held the sword pattern stone in his hand. The sword pattern stone couldn't be fake. This outer sect disciple called Zhang Qing really obtained 13 sword pattern stones. Looking at the expression on Zhu Zhanggao's face, the group of protectors at the side already knew what was going on. Moreover, the sword pattern stone was unlikely to be fake. 13 sword pattern stones. How can you say that disciple is incompetent? Who are you trying to insult? Numerous strange gazes once again landed on Zhang Qing's body. They had no choice but to reevaluate this seemingly ordinary outer court disciple. All the protectors knew that according to the previous myriad sword conferences, 13 sword pattern stones was enough to get into the top 68. There were no more than 300 or 400 sword pattern stones in the entire myriad sword battlefield. There are thousands of direct disciples. Even if each of them got a sword pattern stone, only 300 or 400 of them would get one. In the previous myriad sword conferences, the disciple who ranked first would get at most 20 sword pattern stones. It was difficult to get more than 30 sword pattern stones. The disciples who got the same number of sword pattern stones would be ranked according to the time they left the teleportation gate. With 13 sword pattern stones, there was at least an 80% chance of getting into the top 68. Good. Protector Ho Changming laughed. His laughter was very heroic. He was originally silent, but in an instant he became heroic. He waved his sleeves and immediately said to Zhang Qing, "Quickly go to the front and count the sword pattern stones. Master is very happy, very happy." "Yes, master." Zhang Qing heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed that there was no problem. He immediately left and retreated. "Those who came out of the myriad sword battlefield, come and count the sword pattern stones." The deacons and senior disciples of the Xinjiang Gate urged Su, Yi, and the others to count the sword pattern stones and register the rankings. Of course, other than Su, Yi, no one would really think that Su Jiahui and the other outer court disciples would have a sword vein stone with them based on their attire. However, when Su Jiahui, Su Yi, and the others took out their sword pattern stones and counted them, the senior disciples and deacons were dumbfounded. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, Su Jiahui, 15 sword pattern stones. Outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, Wang Fan, 10 sword pattern stones. Outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, Lu Ji, 11 sword pattern stones. Outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, Tan Xiao, 11 sword pattern stones. Outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, Zhang Qing, 13 sword pattern stones. When these voices spread out, the gazes of the people in the crowd changed. They were all from the 36 sword peak, and they were all outer disciples of the 36 sword peak. However, each of them had more than 10 sword pattern stones. Even the group of elders was moved. In an instant, many obscure auras fell directly on Su Jiahui, Wang Fan, and the others. "What's your name? Where's your badge?" It was Situ Muyang's turn. Looking at the unusually young boy in front of them, the deacons and senior disciples were a little surprised. Moreover, counting the sword pattern stones required the Xinjiang Gate's badge. The sword pattern stones could be added to the badge directly. "My name is Situ Muyang. I don't have a badge yet. Count me in the 36 sword peak." Situ Muyang chuckled and took out his interspatial bag. Although he was the son of the sect leader, he had not been in the Xinjiang Gate since he was young, and he had no status in the Xinjiang Gate. Chapter 508. The deacons and senior disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, who had not recovered from their shock, were stunned. They did not expect such a disciple to exist. Register him first. He is a disciple of the Xinjiang Gate. Count him in the 36 sword peak. Elder Duan Yuerong walked over and nodded at Situ Muyang. "Greetings, Elder." Situ Muyang seemed to be familiar with Elder Duan Yuerong and bowed slightly. Elder Duan Yuerong nodded in acknowledgement. Then, she looked at Su Jiahui and sized her up carefully. "Come, let's count them." Situ Muyang smiled and took out a few sword pattern stones from his interspatial bag. He placed them in front of the deacon who was in charge of counting the sword pattern stones. The surrounding people could not help but be shocked. Situ Muyang, outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, 45 sword pattern stones. The deacon's voice was obviously not normal. "What? 45 sword pattern stones? How can there be so many?" The elders could not help but change their expressions. Although almost all of the elders knew Situ Muyang's identity and background, 45 sword pattern stones still shocked them. Situ Muyang was very satisfied. As far as he knew, 45 sword pattern stones were definitely a lot. He then looked at Su Yi with admiration. So many sword pattern stones were the result of their concerted efforts and tacit cooperation. Su Yi looked around and saw the expressions of the guardians and elders. Everything was as he had expected. Wang Fan and the others had attracted the attention of the elders and guardians. First, it was Su Yi's turn. He walked forward and took out the sword pattern stones from his interspatial bag. Su Yi, outer disciple of the 36 sword peak, 50 sword pattern stones. The voice of the deacon who announced the result was trembling. When the deacon announced the result, all eyes were fixed on Su Yi. Many people secretly sucked in a breath of cold air and smacked their lips. 45, 50. They looked at Su Yi, Situ Muyang, and the others as if they had seen something incredible. 45, 50, 15, 13. They are all outer disciples of the 36 sword peak. The sword pattern stones, they have occupied half of the sword pattern stones in the entire battlefield of 10,000 swords. They are all outer disciples of the 36 sword peak. Just a few of them have already occupied half of the sword pattern stone. Many people smacked their lips. The group of elders frowned. Su, Yi, and the other outer disciples had already obtained so many sword vein stones. One could only imagine how many sword vein stones the others had. Moreover, they all had personal disciples in the myriad sword battlefield. They couldn't help but worry for their disciples. The 36 sword peak is a little special this time. The first few disciples who came out not only had sword vein stones, but they were also from the 36 sword peak. Some of them were even outer sect disciples of the 36 sword peak. Little girl, how about I take you in as my personal disciple? Elder Duan Yuerong quietly came to Su Jiahui's side. Her eyes were still filled with uncontrollable shock. How could Elder Duan Yuerong not feel the aura on Su Jiahui's body? A 16-year-old girl with a cultivation of the 5th level of the Yuan Profound Realm. What kind of talent was that? When Yinling Feng, Ryugan River, and the others came to Xinjiang Gate, they were far from reaching this stage. Ha, little girl, not bad. Why don't you join the 28th Sword Peak and become my personal disciple? Little girl, come to the 17th Sword Peak. You will inherit my legacy. Come to the 19th Sword Peak, little girl. Following Elder Duan Yuerong's words, a large group of elders in the surroundings rushed over. Elder Duan Yuerong's actions could not escape their eyes. How could you, Chanqing, Mei Huaye, Lu Baimei, and the other elders not see Su Jiahui's potential? They had been secretly watching her for a long time. They all wanted to accept this disciple who had made a mistake. Su Jiahui was stunned. She did not expect a group of elders to surround her. Under the invisible aura, she could not help but feel nervous. She could not help but move closer to Su Yi. Su Jiahui, is your father suching you? An elder stepped forward. His face was deep and handsome. He must have been a handsome man when he was young. He had a dignified temperament. He was Elder Shangwan Hu. Elder, my father is suching you. Su Jiahui was surprised. This was a dignified, disciplinary hall elder. How could he know her father? If I remember correctly, your father used to be an outer disciple of Xinjiang Gate, right? Elder Shangwan Hu looked at Su Jiahui. His dignified face showed a smile to Su Jiahui. Yes, Su Jiahui was very nervous. Being in such close contact with an elder of the disciplinary hall, not to mention that she was surrounded by elders. The invisible aura was enough to make her tremble. Back then, before I came to the disciplinary hall, your father was an outer disciple of my sword peak. Originally, he had a high chance of becoming an inner disciple or even a direct disciple, but unfortunately, he violated the rules of the sect and lost his chance. I'm afraid that your father spent a lot of effort to send you to the Divine Sword sect, which is enough to prove your father's feelings for the Divine Sword sect. Elder Shangwan, who was a little regretful. He then looked at Su Jiahui with a touch of gentleness in his eyes. He continued, however, your father gave birth to such a good daughter. How about this? You become my direct disciple. It can be considered as fulfilling one of your father's wishes. Elder Shangwan, are you trying to use the emotional card to snatch her away? Elder Duan Yuerong rolled her eyes and stared at Shangwan Hu. This guy was obviously trying to use the emotional card to snatch her away. She couldn't help but regret not accepting this little girl as a direct disciple on the 36th Sword Peak. Now that she thought about it, she couldn't help but regret it. Many elders originally wanted to go up and fight for her. This little girl was extraordinary and had amazing talent. If they could take her as their disciple, it wouldn't take many years for her to be on the same level as the flowing Cloud River and Yinling Feng. However, when they saw Elder Shangwan Hu interfering, all the elders present sighed regretfully. It seemed that Elder Shangwan Hu was going to get a big bargain this time. Elder Duan, I didn't mean that. Let the little girl choose for herself. Chapter 509. Su Jiahui was nervous. Not only did she look at Su Yi, but her body also subconsciously leaned closer to Su Yi. At this moment, Su Jiahui's heart was indeed a little complicated. She knew that her father's dream was to one day make her an inner disciple of the Xinjiang Gate. He even hoped that she would be a direct disciple. If she became his disciple now, it would be considered as fulfilling her father's wish. Choose for yourself, Su Yi whispered in Su Jiahui's ear. He did not expect so many elders to fight for a disciple. However, thinking about Su Jiahui's extraordinary performance, Su Yi also knew in his heart. Moreover, Su Yi also hoped that Su Jiahui, Lu Ji, and the others could receive more attention from the elders and protectors. Su Jiahui composed herself and hesitated for a moment. Then, she bowed to the surrounding elders and said, "Thank you for your kindness, elders. I will still be a disciple of the 36th Sword Peak. I will make a decision after I report to Elder Su when he returns." Hearing this, Elder Shangguan who frowned and felt helpless. Elder Duan Yuerong was secretly moved. This girl had rejected her in the same way last time. All the elders were also quite surprised. If it was any other outer disciple, the elders would fight to be the first to accept her as a direct disciple. They would be overwhelmed by the favor. Someone else is coming out. The difference in time is too long. Did something happen over there? It seems to be some outer disciples. Finally, someone else appeared from the space portal. However, as more and more figures walked out, they were all outer disciples. This made everyone somewhat puzzled. The elders and protectors' gazes finally fell on the exit of the space portal. When they saw that it was another outer disciple coming out, they were puzzled. Sita Muyang and Su Yi looked at each other and secretly smiled. The people who came out of the portal were naturally the outer disciples. It should be known that the direct disciples and inner disciples would not be able to reach the portal in such a short time. More and more personal disciples walked out. Those who were able to walk out of the teleportation gate were also quite happy. However, the faces of the elders and protectors grew increasingly solemn. Over 1,000 outer sect disciples had walked out, but not a single personal disciple or inner sect disciple could be seen. How could they not be nervous? Where are the direct disciples and inner disciples? Did something happen inside? An elder stepped forward and asked the outer disciple who had just exited the battlefield of 10,000 swords. "Elder, have all the direct disciples, inner disciples, and senior brothers and sisters gone to hunt down Su Yi and Sita Muyang?" Facing the elder, the outer sect disciples were very nervous. They looked at Su Yi and Sita Muyang who were also in the square. Their eyes flashed as they reported to the elder. Hunting down Su Yi and Sita Muyang. Hearing this, the elders and protectors present were secretly surprised. They could not help but look at Su Yi and Sita Muyang. Hunting down these two guys? Could it be that all the direct disciples and inner sect disciples went to hunt down Su Yi and Sita Muyang? If that was the case, why did Su Yi and Sita Muyang come out first? What exactly happened? Tell me in detail, the elder asked, wanting to know the details. Several outer sect disciples reported the general situation while trembling with fear. The general idea was that Su Yi and Sita Muyang had obtained all the mystical spirit fruits, and that Su Yi and Sita Muyang had plundered all the inner sect disciple space bags. Many personal disciples have been robbed by Su Yi and Sita Muyang. In the end, all the direct disciples and outer sect disciples went to hunt down Su Yi and Sita Muyang, but for some reason, Su Yi and Sita Muyang were the first to exit the teleportation gate. You're saying that all the direct disciples and outer sect disciples went to hunt down Su Yi and Sita Muyang? Some elders could not believe it. A few thousand direct disciples and so many inner sect disciples. What kind of formation was that to hunt down Sita Muyang and Su Yi? But looking at the current situation, Sita Muyang and Su Yi were completely fine. Many outer sect disciples nodded their heads in affirmation. It was true that all the direct disciples and inner sect disciples had gone to hunt down Su Yi and Sita Muyang. They were also wondering why Su Yi and Sita Muyang were the first to exit the battlefield of 10,000 swords. What? When they found out about this, Everyone's gazes instantly landed on Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang as though they had been electrocuted. A direct disciple came out. It's Gu Chanyu, and the 11th sword, Nan Lilan, Zhang Lingyun, Gong Qi, Sakura, Asaka. At the same time, many voices were heard in the square. The figures of the direct disciples finally appeared in the space portal. Swoosh, swoosh, one by one, extraordinary young figures flew out of the space portal. They were the direct disciples with extraordinary auras. Swoosh, swoosh, more and more direct disciples poured out of the space portal. The people at the front were the ones who ranked at the top of the sword pagodas. When the direct disciples walked out of the space portal, their eyes immediately scanned the crowd as if they were searching for something. When the crowd looked at these direct disciples, they were very surprised. All of these direct disciples looked very disheveled. Their hair was disheveled, and they seemed to be angry. Boss Su Yi, the one in front, is Gu Chunyu, 4th in the sword pagodas. Nan Lilan, 7th in the sword pagodas. Gong Qi and Sakura, Asaka, 6th and 5th in the sword pagodas. Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others whispered to Su Yi, informing Su Yi of the identities of the direct disciples who walked out. Su Yi's gaze had long fallen on the personal disciples who had walked out. He had seen them from afar during the big hunt. Su Yi secretly sized them up. Gu Chenyu was ranked 4th in the sword pagoda, but he was only in his 20s. His slender figure was as straight as a pole. His eyebrows were as sharp as knives, and his eyes were flashing with a crimson color. Nan Lilan was tall and slender. He wore a light purple robe embroidered with green silk patterns. His eyes were bright, his eyebrows were slanted, and his face was handsome. Cool Craftsman F Network forever reads 9 novels. What surprised Su Yi was the woman called Sakura, Asaka. She was beautiful and ranked very high in the sword pagodas. Being 5th in the sword pagodas also represented her strength. Besides Sakura, Asaka, there was a woman of similar age. Her phoenix-like eyes were shining with green brilliance. She was also very beautiful. She was Gong Qi, 6th in the sword pagodas. Su Yi vaguely remembered that Gong Qi's Yuan Qi seemed to have transformed into a cloud dragon colt. Her speed during the big hunt was astonishing. Whoosh! A young man in white jumped out of the space portal. His figure was tall and straight, and his black eyes were shining with dazzling light. As he walked out, the direct disciples beside him also made a path for him. The one in white is Yun Lingfeng, 2nd in the sword pagodas and a disciple of the 15th sword peak. Chapter 510. The words 15th sword peak attracted Su Yi's attention. He looked at the young man in white, who was ranked 2nd in the sword pagoda. Such a ranking was enough to show his talent and strength. It was undeniable that when Su Yi's gaze landed on Yun Lingfeng's body, he indeed felt that his temperament was not ordinary. Yun Lingfeng's aura was somewhat restrained, making it difficult to detect. However, the vigorous fluctuations of his aura made it clear to Su Yi that this fellow was not someone to be trifled with. Suddenly, Su Yi felt that someone was staring at him. Following that invisible feeling, Su Yi looked over and his expression suddenly changed. Look at the tick. Cool in Craftsman on Chapter R. The next Su Yi saw a familiar figure. Her black hair was tied into a ponytail at the back of her head. Her red lips were tender, and her eyes were as clear as water. Her figure was slender and graceful under her orange clothes. Who else could it be other than Mu Yao? Mu Yao walked out of the spatial teleportation gate. She possessed an otherworldly bearing, like a fairy descending from the heavens. She attracted quite a few gazes from the surroundings. However, her eyes immediately found Su Yi and stared at Su Yi. If looks could kill, Su Yi would have died countless times by now. Su Yi is over there. As expected, he has already come out. It's Su Yi and Sitamuyang. They might have obtained all the benefits from the tribulation. After all, they were originally on that mountain. When a personal disciple saw Su Yi and Sitamuyang, his voice spread out. In an instant, Numerous gazes locked onto Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang. Su, Yi, Sitamuyang, you've gone too far. Hand over our interspatial bags. Su, Yi, hand over the mystical spirit fruit, or we won't let you off. When they saw the figures of Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang, those personal disciples who had been blacklisted by Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang could no longer remain calm. They had a belly full of grievances and depression to begin with. Now, they suddenly exploded and began to feel indignant. There were even personal disciples who shouted that they wanted to obtain the mystical spiritual fruit. However, even though these personal disciples were shouting loudly, they knew how frightening Su Yi was. For some reason, they were somewhat fearful. Even Zhang Lingyun, who was ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda, had been defeated. No one dared to take the lead. However, two people walked out. Two beautiful women walked out together. Under the crowd's gaze, these two beautiful women directly walked in front of Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang. Their eyes glowed, and their auras filled the air. The two people who walked forward were Sakura, Asaka, and Gongqi, who were ranked 5th in the Sword Pagoda. Looking at Su, Yi, and Sitamuyang, Sakura, Asaka spoke. Her eyes were bright, and her voice was like the sound of nature. However, there was a hint of irrefutability in her voice. She said, "We only want 2 mystical spiritual fruits. As for the rest, it has nothing to do with us. Otherwise, don't say that we're bullying the weak." Looking at Ying Qianqian and Gongqi, who had stepped forward and hearing these words, the surrounding personal disciples fell silent for a moment. Even the group of stunned elders and protectors at the side did not move. They were all sizing up the situation. At this moment, they did not know what was going on. However, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and the others were very nervous at this moment. The two people in front of them were powerful existences ranked 5th and 6th in the Sword Pagoda. If it was in the past, they would not even have the chance to meet them. Looking at Sakura, Asaka, and Gongqi, Sitamuyang, and Su, you were also sizing them up curiously. It was undeniable that these two women were not simple. "I don't have the mystical spiritual fruit on me. You got the wrong person." Su, he shook his head. No matter what, he naturally could not admit that the mystical spiritual fruit was on him. "It seems that you've chosen to let me take it myself," Gongqi said with a calm expression. However, the aura on her body was already surging. This was a warning and threat. She would not believe Su Yi's words. Otherwise, this guy would not have kept running away. Su Yi was not moved. He never liked being threatened, nor did he like being looked down upon in such an overbearing manner, even though she was a good-looking woman. Looking at Gongqi, Su Yi's lips curled up. A smile appeared on his face as he said, "Do you like me and want to marry me? However, even if you marry me, I really don't have the mystical spiritual fruit to give you." Hearing Su Yi's words, everyone was dumbfounded. None of the disciples in the Xinjiang Gate dared to speak to Gongqi in such a manner. This was not provocation, but flirting. Furthermore, it was flirting in public. Boom! In an instant, as soon as Su Yi finished speaking, an aura exploded and swept out in all directions, causing the ground of the square to crack. Green light was dazzling and fog filled the air. Waves of water emerged from the ground and intertwined with each other. In an instant, they formed the shadow of a huge, ferocious fish beast. It opened its ferocious mouth and bit toward Su Yi. This sudden turn of events stunned everyone, including Sitamuyang and the rest. However, no one was surprised. Su Yi actually dared to flirt with Gongqi. Was he looking for a beating? At this moment, under everyone's astonished gazes, Su Yi seemed to have made preparations at the same time. His figure suddenly moved at a strange and fast speed. It was so fast that it surprised everyone. Swish! In a split second, Su Yi actually avoided the ferocious fish and rushed in front of Gongqi. With a shake of his right arm, a palm print directly slammed towards Gongqi's face. Humph! Gongqi was stunned and very surprised. However, in the next moment, she let out a soft snort from her throat. Green light surged, and she directly wanted to resist with her palm. However, at this moment, Su Yi's mouth curved into a crazy smile. The right palm that he stretched out suddenly shrank, and then the soles of his feet and the ground created a series of afterimages. He turned 180 degrees at an incredible angle. As his left arm stretched out and shrank, he pulled Gongqi into his arms and squeezed hard. He said softly in Gongqi's ear, "Look, you said you didn't like me, but you took the initiative to throw yourself into my arms." Such a scene stunned everyone. Gongqi was hugged by Su Yi just like that. Sakura Asaka, who was not far away, was also stunned. This seemed to be completely out of her imagination. Gongqi was also stunned and a little sluggish. "Bastard, I'm going to kill you." But it was only for a moment. Gongqi let out a shout and stomped her foot on the ground. The aura on her body surged out and a green light shone brightly. Her right hand, which contained a ferocious energy, spun around and directly struck Su Yi with her elbow. "Are you shy? Let's talk about it later." This fierce aura made Su Yi's expression change secretly. He did not show any trace, but he was already prepared. He immediately retreated, his feet touching the ground, and quickly jumped. "Bastard, I won't let you go." Gongqi was furious. No one had ever treated her like this. He took liberties with her in public and even attacked her. She was careless and was completely unprepared. Chapter 511. After being taken advantage of in front of everyone, how could Gongqi let it go? She waved her hand and chased after him. Su Yi's expression changed slightly. Gongqi was definitely not someone to be trifled with. He was only able to take advantage of her because he was careless. Su Yi did not dare to be careless. He landed at a low altitude, touched the ground again, and retreated again. "What a disgrace." "Stop it," someone shouted. The person who spoke was an old man in his 70s. His hair was white, but his face was ruddy, and his voice was loud like a bell. As soon as the old man finished his sentence, the furious Gongqi came to a halt. She stomped her feet angrily and said to the old man, "Master, that lecher is shameless and perverted." How am I shameless and perverted? You were the one who attacked first. This is no longer the battlefield of 10,000 swords, and you're asking me for the mystical spiritual fruit? I don't have it. Even if I did, why should I give it to you? Su Yi also stopped and looked at Gongqi. His expression did not change. Finally, someone stepped forward to stop them. "We're already out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. What are you doing? Do you still want to fight after leaving the battlefield of 10,000 swords? Moreover, the Guardian Elders are here. Do you have no respect for the sect rules?" Upon hearing Su Yi's words, the Guardian Elders originally wanted to take the opportunity to test Su Yi's background. At this moment, they could no longer pretend that they did not see anything. Many of the elders berated them. The personal disciples who were originally jeering also stopped talking. However, many of them glared at Su Yi, and many of them wanted to skin Su Yi alive. If it were not for Su Yi, they would not have been so miserable in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. Little lecher, bastard, Gongqi was not willing to give up. She angrily stomped her feet, and her beautiful eyes were sharp as if she wanted to cut Su Yi into pieces. "Don't mess around," the old man gave Gongqi a look. "Master." Gongqi was furious. That little lecher actually hugged her, and it was her waist. Her anger could not be extinguished, but now there was no other way. She could only clench her teeth and suppress her anger. Her sharp eyes were like swords, staring at Su Yi from afar. Mu Yao stood in the crowd and glared at Su Yi. She didn't make any unnecessary movements and directly walked forward. She didn't show any respect to the group of elders. She walked past the group of elders and arrived in front of the deacon who was counting the sword vein stones. She took out a handful of sword vein stones and directly handed it to the deacon. She glared fiercely at Su Yi and left. The group of elders watched as Mu Yao swaggered off. The gazes on each of their faces were very complicated. Every elder seemed to have some kind of tacit understanding, as if they didn't see Mu Yao at all. Su Yi noticed all of this and was astonished. He felt that something was amiss. disciples who came out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. If you have sword vein stones, please come forward and count them. Disciples who don't have sword vein stones, please stand aside. Someone will come forward to register them. A deacon spoke. His voice was mixed with vitality and reverberated in the square. It was loud enough for everyone to hear clearly. Humph! Hearing this, many pro-disciples rolled their eyes at Su Yi and reluctantly went forward to count the sword vein stones. Master, please uphold justice for us. Su Yi and Sitamuyang are too shameless. They sneaked up on us with a black brick and stole our space bags and sword vein stones. Master, please uphold justice for us. Our sword vein stones were also stolen by Su Yi and Sitamuyang. Elder, please uphold justice for us. Elder, Su Yi has gone too far. He stole our space bags as soon as he entered the battlefield of 10,000 swords. He even controlled a group of barbaric beasts to deal with us. Elder, please uphold justice for us. Su Yi didn't act recklessly in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. He stole all of our space bags. Elder, please uphold justice for us. At the mention of sword vein stones, the pro-disciples who had been robbed by Su Yi couldn't hold it in anymore. They were all disciples of the various elders, and they immediately complained to their masters. Then, all the inner disciples joined in. They were even more miserable. They had only been in the battlefield of 10,000 swords for a few days, and they had been robbed clean by Su Yi. People continued to rush out of the space portal. When they heard the voices in the square, they thought that they were complaining about Su Yi and Sitamuyang. The inner and outer disciples immediately joined in. In an instant, a shocking scene appeared in the square. A group of pro-disciples and inner disciples were crying and complaining about Su Yi and Sitamuyang's crimes. They were like bullied children who saw their parents. The more they complained, the more aggrieved they felt. The entire square had become a venue for Su Yi and Sitamuyang to be accused of all kinds of crimes. The elders and guardians in the square had already fixed their gazes on Su Yi and Sitamuyang. They were stunned. There wasn't the most shocked expression on their faces. There was only more shock. They had robbed tens of thousands of inner disciple space bags, sneak attacked, and many pro-disciples have been robbed. Zhang Lingyun, who was ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda, was one of the victims. From the complaints of the disciples, the elders and guardians could tell that all the mystical spiritual fruits had indeed been taken by Su Yi and Sitamuyang. In the end, tens of thousands of inner disciples and pro-disciples had besieged Su Yi, but he had still managed to escape. He had even encountered a heaven and earth spirit creature or a savage beast tribulation. All the disciples of Xinjiang Gate had almost been killed. How could the elders and guardians not be shocked? They couldn't figure out how Su Yi had done it. Yu Changqing, Mei Huaye, Lu Bai Mei, and the others looked at Su Yi in astonishment. They couldn't help but reevaluate Su Yi. Of course, Sitamuyang's attention was no less than Su Yi's. Many elders looked at Sitamuyang and secretly twitched. They looked a little helpless. They didn't know how this little guy got together with Su Yi. Su Yi, are they telling the truth? Elder Yu Changqing also started to frown as he asked Su Yi, wanting to ascertain the truth. No, Su Yi shook his head, pretending not to know. Su Yi, how dare you deny it? You're despicable. Seeing Su Yi's denial, the crowd became even angrier and more indignant. Su Yi didn't pay much attention to the indignant crowd. They were already out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords, so there was no need to worry. Sitamuyang also didn't take it to heart. He stood quietly beside Su Yi. On the other hand, the gazes of the elders and protectors twitched a little. Looking at the situation, it was likely that the accusations of so many people were not far from the truth. This matter is of great importance. Let the sect master make the decision. Take Su Yi and Sitamuyang away from Sky Sword Peak. The elderly elder with white hair at his temples had an extremely high status among this group of elders, and he spoke in such a manner. Chapter 512. Furthermore, this was the first time something like this had happened in the myriad sword battlefield, and it was related to Sita Muyang. All the elders knew that they couldn't handle this matter. Let's go then. Don't be afraid. Situ Muyang whispered in Su Yi's ears. He wasn't worried at all. After all, the Sky Sword Peak was his territory. Su Yi smiled, but he had some concerns in his heart. After all, the myriad sword battlefield had plundered a little too much. Subsequently, Su Yi, Situ Muyang, Zhang Lingyun, the siblings Pu Hao and Pu Qingqing, as well as other personal disciples and inner disciple representatives, were escorted to the Sky Sword Peak by a group of elders and several guardians. We're in big trouble now. Will Boss Su Yi be all right? Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the rest were worried. It seemed like the matter was serious. Being brought to the Sky Sword Peak was no ordinary matter. This is big. Those are direct disciples and intersect disciples. Tan Chao was also worried. Situ Muyang is the young sect master. He should be fine with Boss Su Yi. Wang Fan said. They knew of Situ Muyang's identity. Situ Muyang is the young sect master, but Boss Su Yi isn't. What if he is taken advantage of? Lu Ji said. Situ Muyang was the young sect master. Naturally, there was no need to worry. Even if he went to the Sky Sword Peak, he would not be at a disadvantage. I'll ask my master. Zhang Qing turned and ran to Ho Changming. After all, his master was a protector. Su Jiahui, Lu Ji, and the rest went up together. With their current status as outer sect disciples, they had no choice. This matter could be big or small. The key is how it is handled. Ho Changming said, as a protector, he didn't have much authority to speak on the Sky Sword Peak. I'm going back to the 36th Sword Peak. I hope that elder, Su, has returned. Su Jiahui's eyes were full of worry. At this moment, her last hope could only be placed on Elder Su. She hoped that Elder Su had returned to Xinjiang Gate. The Heavenly Sword Peak stood majestically in the middle of the mountains. It was as if a dragon was holding its head up high. Its aura was extraordinary, and it was surrounded by mountains and valleys. Su Yi was brought by the elder, and they landed on the square of the Sky Sword Peak as though they were riding on clouds. The thick blue stone was mottled, and the stone tortoise and camel sword pierced the sea of clouds. The palace was magnificent, and the stone pillars were engraved with several ancient beast-shaped patterns. The elders and protectors immediately brought Su Yi and the other disciples to the Sky Sword Peak. Some disciples needed to report to the sect master and let the elders and protectors wait in the main hall. Su Yi followed the elders and walked into the palace. It was his second time here, and he was familiar with it. The main hall was embossed with rare beasts and sword patterns. They were vivid and lifelike. The floor was paved with green jade. The carved beams and painted rafters were mottled, and the atmosphere was solemn. On both sides of the main hall, the chairs were lined up neatly. The elders sat in order, and the atmosphere was solemn. The few accompanying elders could only stand behind the elders. As for Su Yi and the others, they could only stand in the hall. It was his second time here, and Su Yi was familiar with it. Humph. A series of humph could be faintly heard. Many angry gazes were fixed on Su Yi. Su Yi glanced at Zhang Lingyun, Pu Hao, and Pu Qingqing. They didn't seem to be too happy. Don't mind them. They're just losers. Sita Muyang said softly in Su Yi's ear. He didn't care much about Zhang Lingyun, Pu Hao, Pu Qingqing, and the other disciples. They were just losers. Su Yi nodded and didn't take it to heart. Anyway, Sita Muyang was a scapegoat. The most important thing was whether Situ Muyang, Zhang Qing, and the others were reliable. As long as the mysterious space wasn't exposed, it didn't matter even if he was expelled from the Xinjiang Gate. After all, he didn't belong to any sect at the beginning. The gazes of the elders and protectors also fell on Su Yi and Situ Muyang. Not to mention how Situ Muyang and Su Yi were able to escape from the encirclement of all the personal disciples and inner disciples. Su Yi and Situ Muyang defeated Zhang Lingyun, who ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. Even if they defeated her together, it was enough to shock all the elders and protectors. Initial B4 on the 36th Sword Peak. Elder Su, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the other disciples all ran all the way up the mountain, panting. They went straight to Elder Su's residence on the mountain. Su Jiahui was the first to arrive at the 36 Sword Peak. Looking at the quiet residence of Elder Su, she panted and looked dignified. Elder Su hasn't come back yet. Su Jiahui frowned. If Elder Su hadn't come back yet, she really didn't know what to do. When did you become so careless? Are you the only one who came out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords? Did the others die in there? A faint voice was heard. A short figure appeared outside the courtyard silently and stretched his back. His face was slightly old, and he was as thin as a child of 8 or 9 years old. His black hair was mixed with white hair, and he seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. It was Elder Su. However, before Elder Su finished stretching, he suddenly felt something. His eyes fell on Su Jiahui. Then a light flashed in his eyes, and he looked a little surprised. Elder Su, you're back. That's great. That's great. When she saw Elder Su, Su Jiahui's furrowed brows immediately relaxed, and a smile appeared on her face. She immediately said, Elder Su, quickly make a trip to the Sky Sword Peak. Something big has happened. Zhang Lingyun, did you really lose to Su Yi and Sita Muyang? Weren't you ambushed by them? In the great hall of the Sky Sword Peak, the sect leader had yet to arrive. Under the complicated and shocked gazes of the elders, Elder Yu Changqing asked Zhang Lingyun. He wanted to ascertain if Zhang Lingyun was truly defeated in a head-on confrontation. If not, this would be too unbelievable. Zhang Lingyun's face was pale. Being questioned by Elder Yu Changqing, his expression couldn't help but twitch. This was equivalent to rubbing salt on his wound. That's right. Zhang Lingyun secretly gritted his teeth and nodded. At this moment, he also wished that he was defeated by a sneak attack and not by direct confrontation. After hearing Zhang Lingyun's words, all the elders and protectors present couldn't help but tremble. Su Yi and Sita Muyang were younger than each other. Zhang Lingyun was ranked 9th in the Sword Pagoda. All the elders and protectors were aware of his talent and strength. However, he was defeated by Su Yi and Sita Muyang. Chapter 5:13. An elder spoke. He was Zhang Lingyun's master. At this moment, he could not sit still. His personal disciple, whom he was so proud of, had suffered such a big setback. Moreover, he was defeated by 2 little guys, Su Yi and Sita Muyang. This made him lose face. Hashtag latest chapter Ta Festival. Smiley face Zhang Lingyun was very aggrieved. He could not help but roll his eyes at Su Yi and Sita Muyang, who were standing not far away. He also wished that he had been seriously injured before he was defeated. However, only he knew that he was at his peak and was well prepared. In the end, he was trampled. Do I need him to be seriously injured to defeat me? Even if I'm alone, he can't take advantage of me. Sita Muyang could not stand it anymore. It was just Zhang Lingyun. Could it be that these elders did not put him and Su Yi in their eyes? The corner of Zhang Lingyun's eyes twitched, but she did not say anything. She knew that Sita Muyang was telling the truth. Even if she was facing Sita Muyang alone, she would not be able to gain the upper hand. She did not know where this brat came from. He was so young, but his strength was so terrifying. Looking at Zhang Lingyun's and Sita Muyang's attitudes, how could the elders not know the truth in their hearts? Their eyes were secretly surging with waves of emotions. Someone is coming. It should be the gate master. Outside the hall, the elders in the hall felt the fluctuation of aura. They immediately stood up. It should be the gate master. Gee, the fluctuation of aura. A figure quietly appeared in the hall. The figure was thin and small. His face was slightly weathered. His black hair was inlaid with silver, and his eyes were bright. Su, Elder Su. When they saw the figure, all the elders and protectors were stunned. It was Elder Su. He was surprised. The person in front of him was his benefactor, Xinjian Gate's Elder Suruga. Greetings, Su. He stepped forward and bowed. Elder Su finally returned to Xinjian Gate. Don't worry, no one will be able to bully you on my 36 Sword Peak. Elder Su turned around and interrupted Su Yi's words. His eyes were fixed on Su Yi, and there was a glimmer in his eyes. "Greetings, Elder Su. Greetings, Elder Su." In the main hall, the various elders had different expressions on their faces as they bowed. "I heard that you brought people from the 36 Sword Peak to the Sky Sword Peak. I came over to take a look." Elder Su's gaze moved away from Su Yi and swept across the dozens of elders in the hall. He spoke indifferently, but the expression on his face was uncertain, and his gaze was completely sidelong. "Elder Su, you're being too serious." Su Yi was a little reckless in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. He stole the space bags of his fellow disciples and ambushed them. That's why we brought him here for the sect master to decide. Elder Su by Mingshan spoke. His eyes flickered as he asked Elder Su, "I heard that Su Yi is your new disciple. Is that true?" "It's none of your business whether he's my disciple or not. I'm taking in a disciple. Who are you to interfere?" Elder Su stared directly at Bai Mingshan and released his aura, which immediately enveloped Elder Bai Mingshan. That aura was so strong that it seemed like it was going to overturn the hall. Elder Su's voice was cold as he said, "I heard that a disciple from the 15 Sword Peak ran to the 36 Sword Peak and behaved atrociously. The disciple didn't know any better, but did you live for nothing? You don't know any better? Or is it that you, Bai Mingshan, don't put me, Saruga, in your eyes? I'll only warn you this once. If you don't know any better next time, I'll slap you." His voice was deafening and impolite. This was Elder Su's attitude. The entire hall was as silent as cicadas in winter. Everyone was intimidated by this aura. Zhang Lingyun, Pu Hao, and the other personal disciples and inner disciples trembled for no reason. This aura was too strong. Even if it wasn't targeted at them, it felt like it was going to shatter their bodies. Su, he was dumbfounded. He was completely stunned. Elder Su was too domineering. He directly told an elder of Shunjian Gate that he was going to slap him. Elder Bai Mingshan's face was green and red, but he didn't dare to breathe loudly. Muyang greets Great Grandmaster. Is Great Grandmaster here? Situ Muyang, on the other hand, was not intimidated. Instead, it was as if he had seen his family. With a smile on his face, he rushed forward directly. He was already a head taller than Elder Su. "Kid, how did you grow up? It's good that you're back. Did you go to the battlefield of 10,000 swords too?" Looking at Situ Muyang, Elder Su's expression immediately softened. He reached out and patted Situ Muyang's face. There was a touch of affection in his eyes. Then he seemed to sense Situ Muyang's aura. Surprise flashed through his eyes, and he said, "Not bad, not bad." Great Grandmaster, Su, he was still in a daze. Elder Su was Situ Muyang's Great Grandmaster. His seniority didn't seem to be ordinary. No wonder these elders treated Elder Su so differently. "I'm back. I've gained a lot in the battlefield of 10,000 swords." Situ Muyang chuckled. "Yeah." Elder Su nodded. He didn't pay attention to Elder Bai Mingshan. He asked Su Yi and Situ Muyang, who were stunned, "Did you two kill any disciples of Shunjian Gate in the battlefield of 10,000 swords?" "No, definitely not." Situ Muyang shook his head. He had never killed anyone. After all, they were all disciples of Shunjian Gate. "No." Su Yi also nodded. He had never killed any disciples of Shunjian Gate. "Okay, then come back with me." Elder Su nodded and gestured for Su Yi to leave with him. Elder Su, this Su Yi took all the mystical spiritual fruits in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. He didn't leave a single one for anyone else. Seeing that Elder Su was about to take Su Yi away, an elder gritted his teeth and said, "The mystical spiritual fruits were extremely important to this batch of disciples." "Yeah, Elder Su. This Su Yi was indeed a little too bold in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. He plundered the spatial bags of tens of thousands of inner disciples, as well as the spatial bags and sword pattern stones of many direct disciples. This caused chaos in the battlefield of 10,000 swords and seriously disrupted the order of the Myriad Sword Conference. Let's wait for the sect master to make a decision," an elder said in a low voice. He didn't dare to speak too loudly. Elder Su's eyes were cold as he swept his gaze across the Xinjiang Gate elders. He then shouted, "Did you Xinjiang Gate elders grow up eating sh*t? The battlefield of 10,000 swords is a training ground. Your disciples are no match for them, so you old folks have to come out and protect them. Do you think the people of my 36 Sword Peak are easy to bully? Come, tell me, which rule of the Xinjiang Gate did Su, Yi, and Situmuyang violate? If you can't tell me today, I won't be polite. My 36 Sword Peak is not easy to bully." Chapter 514. Such a loud shout caused Pu Hao, Pu Qingqing, Zhang Lingyun, and the other disciples to tremble uncontrollably. As for the few elders who had just spoken, it seemed that Elder Su was deliberately targeting them. For some reason, their faces turned pale, and they actually took a step back. Their butts landed on the chair behind them, and even the chair was directly shattered as they fell to the ground. Sui also felt a thunderous roar in his ears. What was even more shocking was the aura that Elder Su had displayed. This was too domineering. It actually scared an elder of Xinjiang Gate to the point of falling to the ground. At this moment, Sui couldn't help but feel warm in his heart. No matter what, Elder Su was standing up for him. A warm feeling flowed through his heart. All the elders trembled and their gazes changed. They knew Elder Su's temper very well. Yes, outside the Sky Sword Peak's main hall, two figures appeared. The disciples at the door were shocked by the shocking scene inside the main hall and immediately bowed. The one in front was a middle-aged man. He wore a black robe with golden embroidery, outlining his muscular body. His long black hair was neatly combed into a bun. He waved his hand to signal the disciples to be silent. Listening to the movements in the main hall, his deep eyes flashed. It was the Xinjiang Gate's gate master, Sitaluyan. A gray-robed elder followed closely. Seeing this, his eyebrows twitched slightly. He was also listening to the movements in the main hall. He was the Xinjiang Gate's right protector. Immediately, Situmuyang had a bitter smile on his face. He waved his hand and directly turned to leave quietly. The right protector also revealed a bitter smile at this moment. He signaled to the disciples with his eyes and also left with Sitaluyan. "What? You have nothing to say. What sect rule did Su-Yi break in the battlefield of 10,000 swords? Tell me." Elder Su directly sat on a big chair and leaned back. His cold gaze swept across the entire hall. His aura fluctuated and his voice was like thunder. The group of elders smiled bitterly. They knew best that although Su-Yi was a little bold in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, as long as he didn't intentionally kill his fellow disciples in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, it didn't count as breaking the sect's rules. Furthermore, the purpose of the Battle of 1,000 Swords was to hone one's skills, and there were some rules that allowed disciples to enter the Battle of 1,000 Swords to turn a blind eye to them. Even though Su-Yi had been brazen and reckless in the Battle of 1,000 Swords, it could still be a big or small matter, and it all depended on how it was handled. Logically speaking, even if Su-Yi had taken all the mystical spirit fruits, it was Su-Yi's own ability, and there was nothing they could say. As for robbing the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags, this kind of thing was not uncommon in the myriad sword battlefield. Inner sect disciples robbing the outer sect disciples of their elixirs, personal disciples robbing the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags. This was too normal. However, in every myriad sword conference, no one had ever done what Su-Yi had done, robbing all the inner sect disciples of their interspatial bags, and even ambushing and robbing many personal disciples. Yu Changqing, Shang Wanhu, Duan Yuerong, Mei Huoye, and the other elders secretly smiled. Some of the elders had wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to obtain a few profound mystical spiritual fruits, but they hadn't expected Elder Su to suddenly return. This time, they could only suffer. No one is speaking? It seems like you all have nothing to say. Elder Su's gaze swept across the crowd. His voice was not soft at all as he said in a deep voice, "Then don't casually stand up for your disciples in the future. If the disciples are useless, the elders will stand up for them. This is only in Shunjian Gate. If this was outside, Shunjian Gate's reputation would be completely ruined by you all. The elders' eyes twitched and their faces turned green. They were elders, but they were being reprimanded at this moment. However, they were unable to refute, nor did they dare to refute. My 36 Sword Peaks disciples did not violate the sect's rules. There is no need to trouble the sect master to come here. Seeing that everyone was silent, Elder Su stood up and turned to leave the hall. At the same time, he said to Su, let's go back first. In my 36 Sword Peak, there is nothing to be afraid of. If anyone dares to bully you, I won't be polite to them. Su-yi looked at Elder Su's short back and felt that he was so tall. A special feeling welled up in his heart. He did not say anything and silently followed behind. It seems like I have nothing to do. Sita Muyang chuckled and also left. The remaining elders and protectors looked at each other in the hall. Some of them had not recovered from their shock. Looking at the short back, no one dared to say anything at this moment. The corner of Elder by Ming Shan's eyes twitched. His face did not look too good. It's okay, After walking out of the hall, Sita Muyang whispered into Su Yi's ear with a smile. It seemed like with the help of the Grandmaster, nothing happened this time. Everything was fine. Kid, you're not bad. You didn't go there for so many years in vain. It seems like you didn't stay there for nothing. Sita Muyang's whispers naturally could not escape Elder Su's ears. He immediately turned around and rolled his eyes at Sita Muyang. However, there was some unconcealable surprise in his eyes. How could Elder Su not sense Sita Muyang's cultivation aura at this moment? With his age and cultivation, such talent was definitely rare in the entire continent. Grandmaster, I will continue to work hard and strive to defeat Su. Sita Muyang smiled. In front of Elder Su, he revealed a childish smile. However, he could not help but feel a little guilty when he said that he wanted to defeat Su-yi. The more he interacted with Su-yi, the more he knew how abnormal Su-yi was. Elder Su's eyes secretly moved and fell on Su-yi again. Elder Su understood Sita Muyang's arrogant character quite well. He never admitted defeat. However, from Sita Muyang's tone, it seemed that he was extremely guilty of Su-yi. If there was not a slight difference, Sita Muyang would not admit defeat like this. Although Elder Su was shocked that Sita Muyang could reach such a level at such a young age, he could also understand. After all, the resources that Sita Muyang had received since childhood were beyond the imagination of ordinary people. Moreover, he had a good foundation that ordinary people could not compare with. However, although Su-yi was slightly older than Sita Muyang, Sita Muyang's attitude alone was enough to prove everything, not to mention everything that he had learned from Su Jiahui and Zhang Qing. Y2CU, Genuine, Chapter 10 Section, Previous X1 Square Root J. Elder Su. As Elder Su was sizing up, a female voice came from inside the main hall. Elder Duan Yuerong had chased after him. What's the matter? Elder Su's gaze did not reveal anything. He raised his eyes slightly and said to Elder Duan Yuerong. His attitude was much better than before. Chapter 5:15. Elder Duan Yuerong gritted her teeth and said to Elder Su. She didn't want Su-yi anymore, but she didn't want to miss out on Su Jiahui. She wanted to take her in as a disciple. Elder Su looked at Elder Duan Yuerong calmly and said, Do you think that the 36 Sword Peak is not as good as yours? Or do you think that the disciples of Suruga are not as good as yours? The calmer Elder Su was, the more frightened Elder Duan Yuerong felt. She gritted her teeth and said to Elder Su, Elder Su, that's not what I meant. It's just that the little girl is really talented and I like her. If she can become my disciple, I will teach her well and pass on my legacy. Su-yi and Sita Muyang were a little surprised, but Su-yi was not surprised. With Su Jiahui's talent, Elder Duan must have a good eye for talent. Elder Su didn't say anything, but his eyes flickered. He knew who Elder Duan Yuerong was talking about. He had seen Su Jiahui and felt the changes in the disciples, especially Su Jiahui. He knew what it meant. If Elder Su doesn't want to, then I can't force you. Elder Duan Yuerong felt a little regretful. She really wanted to take in such a disciple and even pass on her legacy. In 2 days, I will send that little girl over. Teach her well. Elder Su suddenly looked at Elder Duan Yuerong and said. As soon as he finished speaking, his aura fluctuated. He grabbed Su Yi's shoulder and flew away. Thank you, Elder Su. Su Yi felt his vision blur, and then he was already shuttling through the air and clouds. Elder Duan's happy voice came from behind him. In just a moment, Su Yi landed on the 36th sword peak. It's Elder Su and Su Yi. Boss is back. Greetings, Elder Su. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others immediately gathered around. Seeing that Su Yi was in good condition, their nervous expressions relaxed. After coming out of the myriad sword battlefield, go and rest. Elder Su said to everyone. Elder Su Yi had stayed in the Shunjin Gate because he wanted to thank Elder Su personally for saving his life. There's no need to say anything more. Since you've already participated in the Myriad Sword Conference, the sword pattern stones you took out should be enough to enter the final battle in 3 days. Participate well first. Elder Su waved his sleeves, indicating that Su Yi did not need to say anything more. As soon as he finished speaking, his figure disappeared. Su Yi was slightly stunned. It seemed that Elder Su did not blame him for pretending to be a Shunjian Gate disciple. He did not even say anything. Boss Su Yi, are you all right? Did the sect leader punish you? Seeing that Elder Su had left, Zhang Qing, Tan Chao, and the others dared to ask Su Yi. I didn't see the sect leader. Su Yi roughly explained the situation to everyone. He also learned from Zhang Qing that everyone had returned to the 36th sword peak to look for Elder Su. That was why Elder Su suddenly appeared at the sky sword peak. He also learned about the situation and knew how many sword pattern stones he had taken out in the myriad sword battlefield. After that, Su Yi returned to the courtyard where he had stayed on the 36th sword peak. It seemed that the final battle of the Myriad Sword Conference on the spiritual sword peak would be in 3 days. At dusk, the setting sun was as red as blood, and multicolored light filled the sky. Somewhere in the sky sword peak, in a courtyard pavilion, smoke rose from an incense burner. How did this kid do it? Sita Luyun stood in front of the window, looking at the setting sun outside. At this moment, her eyes were full of doubts. He robbed all the inner disciples, stole all the mystical spiritual fruits, and even used the black brick to launch a sneak attack. Most importantly, the young sect leader is actually with that kid. The Right Protector revealed a bitter smile at this moment, mixed with shock and surprise. He said to Situ Luyun, Zhang Lingyun was defeated. The strangest thing is that with so many people, they still couldn't catch them. Instead, Elder Su suddenly returned. Otherwise, those elders would not have given up for the mystical spiritual fruits. It seems that many things still need to be investigated in the myriad sword battlefield before coming to a conclusion. Let's wait and see. Elder Su's arrival is a good thing. Situ Luyun said. The Right Protector smiled slightly. He knew very well that Elder Su's appearance had inadvertently helped the sect leader. Otherwise, this situation would have made things difficult for the sect leader. There are already experts who have gone to investigate the myriad sword battlefield. According to the disciples, many strange things have happened in the myriad sword battlefield this time. The Right Protector said, let's talk about it after the investigation. Sita Muyang said. His eyes moved slightly, and then with some curiosity, he asked the Right Protector, have you checked the sword pattern stones? 3 days later, those who will be able to ascend Lingjian Peak should be more or less the same, right? Those who will be able to ascend Lingjian Peak 3 days later are more or less the same as the disciples originally expected. However, many accidents have occurred. Speaking of this, the Right Protector revealed a bitter smile again. What happened? Situ Luyun asked. I just received the name list. This time, 7 people from the 36th Sword Peak have entered the top 68. Among them, the young sect leader is ranked 2nd. Su Yi is ranked 1st. The remaining 5 outer disciples are all ranked within the top 20. The Right Protector said helplessly. This, Hearing this, the corners of Situ Liuyun's mouth could not help but twitch. At dusk, the setting sun shone. There were roars of beasts, and a deacon brought several older disciples to the 36th Sword Peak. They personally went up the mountain and did not dare to ride their mounts. The deacon brought the news that 7 outer disciples from Shunjian Gate had entered the top 68. 3 days later, they would go to Lingjian Peak for the final battle. We entered the top 68. When they received such news, Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, Wang Fan, Lu Ji, and Su Jiahui were ecstatic. They almost thought that they had misheard. They were so excited that they hugged each other and cried. Elder Su stood by the window of a room in the courtyard. His mind was unleashed as he listened to the activity outside. An arc of a smile was lifted on his aged and stern face. His eyes flickered, and it seemed that he was extremely excited. Elder Su, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, Tan Xiao, and the others rushed up and shouted outside the door. They seemed to want to tell Elder Su the good news. On the case section, NT in the room, Elder Su's expression suddenly changed, and his serious voice came out. I know, it's so noisy. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and prepare for the duel on the Spirit Sword Peak in 3 days. Chapter 516. Although Elder Su had domineeringly barged into the Sky Sword Peak this time and brought him back to the 36th Sword Peak, Su knew very well that the Divine Sword Sect would definitely not let him off easily if everything he had obtained in the battlefield of 10,000 swords was exposed. Furthermore, he had pulled the mysterious spiritual tree into the mysterious space. The Shunjian Gate would definitely not take such a precious treasure lightly. This time, he had gained a lot in the battlefield of 10,000 swords, especially the Blood Jade Spirit Ginseng that had successfully passed the tribulation. He wanted to return to the barbarian city as soon as possible to at least check on his grandfather's injuries. Phew, letting out a long sigh, he stopped thinking about it. After all, the final battle was in 3 days. Elder Su had asked him to participate in the Myriad Sword Conference. He originally had this intention. At that time, he would at least be able to face the peak younger generation of the Xinjiang Gate head-on. Moreover, it was related to great opportunities and rewards. Forming a hand seal, he sat down cross-legged and began to circulate his qi to prepare for the battle in 3 days. Suddenly, Su Yi's eyes flashed and he became alert. Someone was approaching the courtyard. Kid, follow me to the back of the mountain. A faint voice sounded. It was Elder Su's voice. Elder Su. Hearing Elder Su's voice, he was quite surprised. He did not know why Elder Su was looking for him. Without much hesitation, he pushed open the door and left. At this moment, the sun had already set and the sky was gradually darkening. A new moon appeared in the sky. He was no stranger to the back of the mountain. When he wanted to secretly leave the Shunjian Gate, he had walked through the back of the mountain and finally met the mysterious, beautiful woman in Muyao. The back of the mountain was quiet and deep. Yi saw from afar that Elder Su was standing on a huge boulder in a spacious area under the cover of night. Elder Su stood with his hands behind his back and his eyes slightly raised as if he was looking into the distance. 7 latest 3 new G chapter, section OC on JB. Greetings, Elder Su. He stepped forward and bowed respectfully. Based on your performance at the Shunjian Gate and the Myriad Sword battlefield, you might have some background. Tell me, where are you from? Elder Su asked Yi without turning his head. I, Yi, come from a remote barbarian city. I don't belong to any sect, so I wouldn't dare to hide anything from Elder Su, Yi replied. His eyes were calm, and what he said was the truth. If you don't belong to any sect, where did your cultivation come from? Elder Su turned his head, his long robes fluttering in the wind. His hair was enveloped by the moonlight, causing the silvery strands of his hair to be even more eye-catching. His eyes were filled with a hint of sharpness as he stared at Yi. Elder Su already knew about Yi's incident at the Shunjian Gate. How could such a youth belong to no sect? My talent was mediocre, and I had 4 attributes. Someone once said that I only had the talent to do odd jobs. I was not blessed by the heavens and was heavily injured in the barbarian demon forest. If not for Elder Su's help, I would have died long ago. Su, he replied. Although he was grateful to Elder Su, he still had to be cautious. Naturally, he could not say too much about the mysterious space. Your 4 attributes seem to be earth, water, fire, and wind, right? Hearing this, Elder Su's eyebrows twitched. Elder Su had treated Su Yi's injuries, so he still remembered that Su Yi had 4 attributes. At that time, he also clearly felt that Su Yi's body was all kinds of extraordinary. The Dantian Shi vortex was much wider than that of ordinary cultivators of the same level. The strength of his body was even comparable to that of a demon clan's cub. These could not escape Elder Su's inspection. Therefore, Suruga also felt that it was strange. Originally, a boy with 4 attributes, and the attributes countered each other. Normally, his talent was ordinary, but everything about him was abnormal. Yes, Sui nodded and smiled bitterly. However, Sui did not care about his qualifications as a servant. So what if he had the qualifications to be a servant? At least among his peers, he had never met an opponent that he could not defeat. 4 attributes. Among your 4 attributes, although one of them is wind, 2 of the other 3 attributes countered each other. Your talent is indeed ordinary, but there are always exceptions. As long as you experience enough training, you can stimulate your endless potential. There are thousands of forms in the mortal world, and if you choose one of the 3,000 Tao of heaven and earth, you can achieve something. In this world, there are rumors that people have entered the Tao with their bodies, and there are also people who have entered the Tao with their swords. Although it is said that people who can succeed in this way are as rare as carps passing through the Dragon Gate, but they do exist. Perhaps you will be one of them in the future. Elder Su looked at Su Yi and said, the fierceness in his eyes calming down a lot. Disciple will continue to work hard. Su Yi nodded. Elder Su's words had greatly encouraged him. Su Yi still remembered that when Elder Ingdang of the 35th Sword Peak was teaching in the Sword Hall, he had also said the same words. Talent was very important, but it was not absolute. I don't want to know too much about your origins. I saved you purely by coincidence. You can consider it as your fate, not fated to end. Elder Su said. Suddenly, his eyes became serious and fierce. He looked at Su Yi and said, but you should remember that if you break the law in the future and become an evil person, I, Suruga, can save you and kill you with my own hands. Disciple will listen to your teachings and keep them in mind. Su Yi bowed respectfully, his eyes full of respect. Well, there's no need to be restrained. Looking at Su Yi, Elder Su could also feel that Su Yi's attitude was correct, neither servile nor overbearing. Although the news he got from Shunjin Gate said that this kid was treacherous and arrogant, Elder Su had his own judgment in his heart. With such nature, he was afraid that he would not become an evil person. Especially when he felt that Su Yi was upright and had a good nature, Elder Su liked him a little more. I pretended to be a disciple of Shunjin Gate. Please forgive me, Elder Su. Su Yi said. No matter what, he pretended to be a disciple of Shunjin Gate. You're not pretending. Now you have the Shunjin Gate badge, so you're already a disciple of Shunjin Gate. If you want to leave in the future, you can leave by yourself. Elder Su said. Thank you very much, Elder Su. Su Yi was grateful. He heard from Zhangqing and others that Elder Su was extremely unapproachable. Ordinary disciples did not dare to get close to him. But at this moment, Su Yi felt that Elder Su was not such a person. He was not as unapproachable as the rumors said. 3 days later, we will have the final battle on Lingjian Peak. How confident are you? Elder Su looked at Su Yi and asked. This, Su Yi hesitated for a moment. With a little smile on his face, he said to Elder Su, I don't dare to have any confidence. Just do your best. Chapter 517. This kid said that he was not confident, but his expression clearly showed that he was confident. This kid was really like the rumors in the sect. It seemed that he was somewhat arrogant. Among this batch of disciples, there are a few decent ones. Each of them has their own trump cards and won't be easy to deal with. Elder Su sized up Su-yi and seemed to have seen through Su-yi. He said, "You have a sword on your back. How much do you know about swords?" I really don't know much about swords." Su-yi smiled bitterly. Speaking of which, he had only truly come into contact with swords after arriving at Xinjing Gate. His first lesson was in the sword hall. He had benefited a lot from listening to Elder Ing Dang's teachings. "Is that so?" Elder Su raised his eyebrows slightly and said to Su, "Hey, how about this? Go all out and try to attack me with the sword moves that you're good at." "Elder Su, that's not very good." Hearing that, Su-yi was slightly stunned. As he spoke, he took out an interspatial bag from his chest and held a sword that was at the level of a spirit weapon tightly in his hand. Su-yi had already forgotten whose interspatial bag he got the sword from. In any case, he got it from one of the direct disciples' interspatial bags. Elder Su asked him to attack. It was clear that he wanted to test him. If he was happy and taught him a move or two, he would have profited greatly. How could Su-yi miss such an opportunity? Looking at Su-yi's actions, Elder Su's eyes twitched in confusion. This kid said that it was not very good, but he was holding the sword in his hand. He probably had some ulterior motives. He knew how to climb up the ladder. He was indeed a bit like the rumors about him being treacherous and cunning. "Go ahead. There's no need to hold back. Go all out," Elder Su said faintly. He had heard many rumors and was very shocked. At this moment, he wanted to test whether those rumors were true or false. "Hee, Elder Su, please forgive my rudeness." Su-yi chuckled. When his voice fell, he secretly took a deep breath, and the expression on his face suddenly became calm. Su-yi didn't know how strong Elder Su was. However, Su-yi could feel that this Elder Su in front of him was definitely one of the strongest people he had ever met. Based on the aura and attitude of the elders in the Sky Sword Peak, it was not difficult for Su-yi to know how powerful Elder Su was. At this moment, Elder Su was intentionally probing him. Su-yi also hoped that an expert like Elder Su would be able to teach him a move or two. Therefore, Su-yi was very nervous and had to do his best. Su-yi was worried that if he didn't perform well enough, Elder Su would look down on him. At that time, Elder Su wouldn't have a desire to guide him anymore. Huff, secretly exhaling, Su-yi circulated the yuan qi within his body. His eyes gradually closed as he raised the sword in his hand to his shoulder. An invisible aura instantly gushed out from his body. Boom! The surrounding space faintly trembled as Su-yi's robes fluttered slightly. The dust and gravel on the ground rolled as a scarlet yuan qi glow instantly surged out from his body. It brought with it a blazing aura and a dignified aura, as if flames were churning. Under the impact of the invisible aura, Elder Su's eyes abruptly flickered before astonishment and shock appeared within them. Fifth level origin spirit stage. Sensing the cultivation aura from Su-yi's body, Elder Su was already sufficiently shocked. With Su-yi's age and cultivation, it was already very shocking. However, what truly shocked Elder Su was the aura emanating from Su-yi's body. With his eyesight, how could he not feel that this aura was the most terrifying? There was also Su-yi's invisible aura. Although his eyes were slightly closed, there was clearly a kind of sword essence aura. Light involuntarily flickered in Elder Su's eyes. He was too astonished. Didn't this brat say that he didn't understand the sword? Yet, he had clearly comprehended a sword intent. However, with his age and origin spirit stage cultivation, it was impossible for him to comprehend sword intent. Sword intent? How was that possible? That was a realm that countless swordsmen dreamed of. This realm had nothing to do with cultivation, but came from the Tao of the sword. Amongst origin emperor stage swordsmen, if they could comprehend their own sword intent, they would already be considered geniuses. How could the cultivation of the essence spirit realm possibly reach such heights? One had to know that sword intent was an extension of the source. This source belonged only to the sword, and was the source of the sword. Sword intent was the unity of form, spirit, emotion, and reason. It was the coordination of the real and the illusory. It was born out of an accident and contained within an image. Comprehending sword intent was a legendary realm. It was an unprecedented realm of comprehension towards the sword, and was known as sword intent. Elder Su couldn't believe it. He was shocked, and his eyes glowed. However, the more he sensed, the more shocked Elder Su became. Elder Su could feel that the invisible aura emanating from Su Yi's body was definitely different. Even with Elder Su's current eyesight, it was difficult for him to determine whether Su Yi had comprehended sword intent. However, Elder Su was certain that the young man before him and his sword were no longer just sword moves. Instead, there was a sword aura that emanated an invisible aura. It seems a little like that. Elder Su's eyes flickered as he recalled a mural in Divine Sword Cliff. At that moment, Su Yi's posture seemed to be exactly the same as the sword move on the mural. However, no one seemed to have comprehended the sword move on the mural. Buzz! Soon, a sharp aura gradually fluctuated from the sword in Su Yi's hand. It was accompanied by the faint sound of wind and thunder. Clanging sounds were heard, and the brilliance filled the air. Unspecified currency dollar, chi. It was also at this moment that Su Yi's tightly shut eyes suddenly opened. Two rays of sword light flashed out from the depths of his eyes. At the same time, an otherworldly aura, accompanied by an enormous pressure, spread out from his body. Swoosh! Su Yi attacked. He stabbed out with the sword in his hand. In an instant, the sword light was dazzling. Red vital chi condensed into a sword light. With a sharp sound, it flew towards Elder Su. Elder Su's eyes flickered. When the sword light was in front of him, he waved his long sleeves. A gust of energy swept out from his sleeves and collided with the sword light. The sword light dissipated and disappeared without a trace. Ding, ding. There was not much movement, but Su Yi's feet brushed against the ground as he retreated in a straight line. After a few steps, he finally stabilized his body. Su Yi was surprised. He had used all his strength, but Elder Su had only waved his sleeves. The difference was too great. Compared to Su Yi, Elder Su was far more shocked than Su Yi. It's barely passable. At your cultivation and age, it's not bad. Chapter 518. P-Head F Sin W. At this moment, Elder Su was the only one who knew the shock in his heart. That sword move just now, putting aside the cultivation base, at least the cultivation base of the Origin Void stage would be difficult to perform. And the sword move that this kid had comprehended, although it had not yet reached the level of true sword intent, it was already at the entry level. The sword momentum had been formed, and to comprehend the true sword intent, only an opportunity was needed. This opportunity may be close at hand, or it may take a long time, or even a lifetime without being able to obtain this opportunity. But what Elder Su could be sure of was that this kid in front of him was absolutely intelligent, and his comprehension ability was as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. And Su, he had not been in Shunjin Gate for long, yet he had already comprehended the sword momentum. But it could be felt that his basic skills were very sloppy. Disciples' basic skills are indeed sloppy. In 3 days, I will go to Lingjian Peak to fight with those well-known figures in Shunjin Gate. Otherwise, I would ask Elder Su to teach me a thing or two. I would be very grateful. Su, he looked at Elder Su's expression, and his eyes secretly turned, wanting to see if he could let Elder Su know a thing or two about himself. It seemed that just now Elder Su was not very satisfied with him, and he did not know if he could get Elder Su's guidance. Kid, don't be so glib. What kind of person was Elder Su? How could he not see Su Yi's thoughts? He said lightly, although I have nothing to do these days, I don't have the time to teach you. Shunjin Gate's foundation of sword, although it is only the basics of using the sword, is very suitable for you now. You can go look for it. Foundation of sword, I have it. Su Yi fumbled in his space bag for a while and found the foundation of sword that he had obtained from his senior disciple under Elder Ingdang's order. This foundation of sword was only the basics of using the sword. He had flipped through it, but he had been in the battlefield of 10,000 swords all this time, so he did not have time to carefully read and practice it. It's best if you have it. You can practice it well. Don't underestimate these basics. Elder Su's voice fell, and with a sweep of his long sleeve, he immediately left. Looking at Elder Su's figure disappearing into the night sky, Suyi's expression was somewhat regretful. It seemed that his performance had not satisfied Elder Su's disinclined to teach him. Foundation of Sword. Su-yi held the basics of sword in his hand. This was not a martial technique, but a basic entry skill that every disciple of the Divine Sword sect had. Every disciple, or even a servant disciple, everyone, they all had a set foundation. Then let's practice the foundation. After a while, Su-yi's eyes were filled with determination. Anyway, he had nothing to do these 3 days, so he could maintain his peak state at any time. It was just the right time to practice the foundation of sword. Su-yi had always been very clear about the principle of building a skyscraper from the ground. Although he had practiced a few sets of sword techniques, the foundation of sword was indeed sloppy and ordinary. Night fell, the new moon hung high in the sky, and the forest was serene and quiet. Su-yi flipped through the foundation of sword and memorized it in his heart. He held the sword in his hand tightly and swung it continuously. Whoosh whoosh. The sword swung without any fluctuation of primordial chi. Su-yi only swung the sword in the most simple way, straight stab, horizontal slash, on the foundation of sword. The foundation of sword was mainly divided into piercing sword, hacking sword, lifting sword, hanging sword, cloud sword, pointing sword, collapsing sword, intercepting sword, etc. Although Su-yi had practiced with the broken sword on his back, it was not as detailed as the foundation of sword. Under the moonlight, in the silent forest, Su-yi held the sword and practiced the foundation of sword again and again. Far away on a mountain peak, a short figure was watching. There was a flash of light in his eyes under the moonlight. In a simple courtyard, the side hall was simple but had an antique flavor. Situ Muyang had changed into a clean black silk robe. He was not old, but he was not short. His black hair was combed, and his face was handsome. His eyes were clear, and he looked very amiable. However, only the disciples of the Shunjian Gate who had experienced the battlefield of 10,000 swords would know that this amiable young man, who looked like a little brother next door, was ruthless when it came to smashing the black brick and plundering the space bags. You and Su-yi worked together to get the profound spirit tree. Where is it now? Sita Luyun looked at Sita Muyang. He had already received news that the profound spirit tree had disappeared from the battlefield of 10,000 swords. We got the profound spirit fruit. We don't know anything else. Sita Muyang replied. He had promised Su-yi that he would give Su-yi access to that special space, and he had even received great benefits from it. Naturally, he would not say anything. Sita Luyun glared at his son. Did this kid know what it meant to help outsiders? He was the young master of the Shunjian Gate. Father, there are no rules in the myriad sword battlefield to speak of. Everything that we have the ability to obtain is our own luck and fortune. Otherwise, why would you let me go in to temper myself? Sita Muyang faintly said to Sita Luyun as the corners of his mouth curled up slightly. You can get everything, but a treasure like the profound spirit tree was not uprooted by you. Sita Luyun glared at Sita Muyang. It was fine that all the profound spirit fruit had been taken, but the profound spirit tree could not be touched. Don't be so fierce to me. Otherwise, I'll go back to my mother and tell her that you don't treat me well and that you don't want to come back. Seeing that his father was about to flip out, Sita Muyang raised his eyebrows and said in a faint voice, You? Sita Luyun's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. It was clear that he was somewhat afraid. Dad, I'm just joking. I've been thinking about you every day for the past few years. I've also gained quite a lot from the battlefield of 10,000 swords this time. I believe that my mother will be very happy. When the time comes, I'll put in a good word for you. Who knows? Maybe she'll come back. Sita Muyang's gaze turned as he smiled intimately at Sita Luyun. Really? Hearing this, Situ Liuyun's gaze instantly wavered, but immediately after, his expression became serious again. He patted the back of Situ Muyang's head. His expression seemed to be strict, but his tone was already much gentler. He said, "Don't give me that. Quickly tell me what happened in the battlefield of 1,000 swords. What kind of opportunity did you obtain?" With Situ Liuyun's strictness, how could he not see the transformation on his son's body? In a short span of a month, Situ Muyang had directly advanced from the second level of the Origin Spirit stage to the late fourth level of the Origin Spirit stage. Such a rapid breakthrough, yet his aura was as stable as a boulder. This was definitely not ordinary. Most importantly, Situ Liuyun could sense that Situ Muyang's body had undergone a transformation from the inside out. It was as if his bones had been cleansed and his marrow had been cleansed. Chapter 519. Nothing much happened. Those so-called direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate, even those ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda, are just SOSO. Situ Muyang shook his head. His young face was filled with confidence. Situ Liuyun's gaze twitched. He knew very well how strong and talented the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate's Sword Pagoda were. Each and every one of those disciples was a proud son of heaven. But at this moment, they were actually looked down upon by someone. And this person was his own son. This made him feel very helpless. This time, Situ Liuyun was originally a little worried that with Situ Muyang's personality, he would not care about the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate and would suffer a lot in the end. But if he told Situ Liuyun's identity in advance, he would lose the purpose of tempering himself in the myriad sword battlefield. But in the end, when Situ Liuyun found out, he could not help but be somewhat dumbfounded. It was really hard to say whether this kid had gained face for him or brought shame to him. Smashing the black brick, snatching the space bag, being surrounded by tens of thousands of Xinjiang Gate disciples, and still being able to escape. If he had not already received confirmation of this, he would not have dared to believe it. However, Situ Liuyun also understood his son's talent. This time, his cultivation had once again soared in the myriad sword battlefield. With his current cultivation strength, he could really fight against those extraordinary fellows who were ranked at the top of the Sword Pagoda. But this time, I did obtain a lot of opportunities in the myriad sword battlefield. But if it were not for Su Yi, I would not have been able to obtain those opportunities. Situ Muyang said to Situ Liuyun with a serious expression. Then he took out a jade box from his space bag and handed it to Situ Liuyun. Situ Liuyun's eyes moved. He opened the jade box, and a mystical spiritual fruit with a medicinal fragrance and multicolored light appeared before his eyes. Q initial and hair this. How could Situ Liuyun not recognize the mystical spiritual fruit? But when he looked at the mystical spiritual fruit in front of him, he could not help but feel astonished. This mystical spiritual fruit was obtained from the myriad sword battlefield. After which, Situ Liuyun turned to Situ Muyang and asked, how could he not see that the mystical spiritual fruit in the myriad sword battlefield was different from this one? Even with the naked eye, he could tell that this mystical spiritual fruit was much stronger than the one in the myriad sword battlefield. This is the mystical spirit fruit from the myriad sword battlefield. Its medicinal efficacy should have increased by quite a bit. Situ Muyang nodded. Improve the efficacy of the medicine. Situ Liuyun's eyes lit up. This mystical spirit fruit had not only increased its medicinal efficacy, but seemed to be on a much higher level compared to ordinary mystical spirit fruits. At the same time, Situ Liuyun was even more flabbergasted. Originally, he had felt that Situ Muyang's cultivation had soared. Perhaps it was because he hadn't listened to him and had directly eaten the profound spirit fruit. However, from the looks of it, Situ Muyang did not consume the mystical spirit fruit. Instead, he had obtained another fortuitous encounter. This fortuitous encounter seemed to be closely related to Su Yi. A new space has appeared in the myriad sword battlefield. Do you know about it? Situ Liuyun's gaze flickered. It was unknown what he was thinking about, but he immediately asked Situ Muyang again. Su Yi and I were the first to enter. We almost died. It was Su Yi who saved us. Sita Muyang replied. What's inside? Situ Liuyun's gaze flickered. He was the clearest about what kind of place the myriad sword battlefield was. Everything that had appeared there, and even escaped the search of the experts of the Xinjiang Gate. It was definitely extraordinary. There are quite a few spiritual herbs and barbaric demonic beasts. Other than that, I didn't discover anything special. Sita Muyang's gaze flickered. He had concealed the matter of the enormous divine bird skeleton. He could sense that in the end, Su Yi and the divine bird skeleton had disappeared. However, Su Yi trusted him greatly. Knowing his identity, he had also revealed his heaven-shaking secret. So Sita Muyang didn't want to cause trouble for Su Yi. Looking at Situ Muyang's expression, Situ Liuyun's expression flickered. It was unknown whether he believed him or doubted him. He continued. When the exit opened, there was a tribulation. I heard that you and Su Yi were nearby. What happened? We also didn't know. Suddenly, heavenly lightning fell. If we hadn't fled quickly, we would have suffered a calamity. Situ Muyang had a lingering fear, but his expression didn't reveal any trace. The matter of the blood jade spirit ginseng's tribulation was naturally not something that could make things difficult for Su Yi. Looking at Situ Muyang, Situ Liyun calmly stared at him for a moment. His expression had an unfathomable feeling. If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. In 3 days, I still have to fight with the direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. I have to prepare. Situ Muyang faced his own father, somewhat lacking in confidence. Go. Be careful in 3 days. Although your cultivation base has improved a lot, the disciples who can go to the Spirit Sword Peak in 3 days won't be easy to deal with. Situ Liyun returned the jade box containing the mysterious spirit fruit to Situ Muyang. He waved his sleeve, indicating that he should leave. Don't worry, I'm not someone to be trifled with. Remember what you promised me. If I can do it, then when the time comes, you can't stop me from going to the Spirit Sword Peak with you. Situ Muyang put away the jade box. His eyes were filled with confidence as he happily left. Watching Situ Muyang leave, Situ Liuyun's gaze continued to sink into contemplation. I didn't expect the young master's progress to be so astonishing. It seems that in 3 days on the Spirit Sword Peak, he will amaze the world. A voice was heard, and an old man walked over. Situ Liyun slightly raised his eyes and asked the old man, how much of this kid's words do you think is true? I don't know how much is true or false, but I can be sure that the relationship between the young master and that kid Su Yi is exceptionally good. Everything that happened in the battlefield of 10,000 swords might have been done by the two of them together. Perhaps they are helping that kid Su Yi to hide something. The old man wore a gray robe and had an amiable expression. His bright eyes emitted a bright light, giving people a feeling of shrewdness. It was the right protector. The mysterious spirit fruit, the mysterious spirit tree, the open space, and the item to pass the tribulation. It seems that all of this is related to these two kids. Situ Liyun lightly said. It seems that the sect master already has some plans in his heart. The right protector looked at Situ Liyun. Based on his understanding of the sect master should have some plans in his heart. The Myriad Sword Conference is in 3 days. I want to see just how far that kid can go. As for other matters, let's talk about them after 3 days. Situ Liuyun's eyes were filled with anticipation, and there was a hidden light in them. The night was hazy, and the night wind was cool and refreshing. Xinjiang Gate was filled with exotic flowers and rare herbs. The faint fragrance from afar refreshed the mind. Humph. Chapter 520. A 9-hell snake cub flicked its tongue. Its entire body was black, and its head was as ferocious as a dragon's. Its pale, golden eyes glowed faintly, and its pair of black wings expanded slightly, emitting a faint black light. It seemed to have sensed Mu Yao's resentment and was very docile and affectionate. Let's see how that kid will hide in 3 days. Mu Yao clenched her teeth as she stroked the 9-hell snake cub's head that was as ferocious as a dragon's head. She had been chasing after Su Yi in the myriad sword battlefield, not only for the battle back then, but also for the mystical spiritual fruit. How could she not be angry that Su-Yi had managed to escape in the few times that they had met? Boom! Hearing Mu Yao's words, the nine-hell snake cub flapped its wings, and a mighty aura spread out from its body. It hissed and flicked its tongue as if it wanted to stand up for Mu Yao. Your cultivation is still not high enough. That kid has some skills, and you are still not his match. When you grow into a real nine-hell snake one day, you will be able to swallow that kid alive. Mu Yao stroked the nine-hell snake cub's ferocious head, and a faint smile appeared in her eyes. Master has said before that there is always someone better than you. Do you believe me now? A voice was heard, and a beautiful woman dressed in plain clothes quietly appeared. Her figure was exquisite under her plain long skirt, and her beautiful black hair was tied up into a flowing cloud bun. There was a jade hairpin in the bun, and she looked elegant yet luxurious. Master, looking at the beautiful woman Su-Yi, Mu Yao immediately pouted and said softly, "This was just an accident. In terms of true strength, he will definitely lose. In a myriad sword battlefield, everything depends on strength. There are no accidents or coincidences." There was a smile in the plain, clothed woman's eyes. Her bright eyes were deep and dark, and it seemed as if they could make one sink into them. She smiled at Mu Yao, a doting look in her eyes as she said, "That little fellow was able to obtain the mysterious spirit fruit and so many sword rune stones. This proves that he did not rely on an accident. He will be a true opponent for you." Mu Yao raised her eyebrows and gritted her teeth. She gave a low snort and pouted, "Humph, I'll make him hand over the mystical spiritual fruit in 3 days. Otherwise, I won't be so courteous." The night was like a curtain in the sky. The new moon hung diagonally in the sky, and the stars twinkled. On the mountain peak, a young man in white stood tall and straight. Under the dim moonlight, his black eyes shone with a dazzling light. The young man was Yun Lingfeng, who was ranked second in the Sword Pagoda. However, at this moment, Yun Lingfeng didn't look too good. Not being able to obtain the mysterious spirit fruit is a pity, but there will be opportunities to make up for it in the future. However, no accidents can happen in this Thousand Sword Conference, as this matter is of the utmost importance. Are you confident in the duel in 3 days? An old man spoke, his eyes shining brightly. It was Elder by Mingshan. After preparing for so long, I also want to see how Ryugan River has improved over the years. Back then, I lost to him so that he would let down his guard. I have prepared for so long for the duel in 3 days. Yin Lingfeng spoke, a fierce light flashing in his eyes. 3 days later, there is no room for mistakes. Also, there is one more person who may be your greatest threat. Elder by Mingshan said, "Although Su-Yi is somewhat capable, he is only relying on his ability to subdue brute demon beasts. He is still not enough to be my true opponent." Yin Lingfeng said in a deep voice. When he thought of that brat, there was an indescribable anger in his heart. Z/update, fastest update, cool you craftsman, Knet, a brat that Elder Su had brought into the Shunjin Gate from God knows where had actually made him suffer in the myriad sword battlefield. However, that brat only had some unorthodox skills. In Elder by Mingshan's heart, that brat was not a true opponent. That brat is not simple. His performance in the heavenly platform was too dazzling. You have to be careful. However, there is one person you have to pay attention to this time, and it is not him. Elder by Mingshan knew that Su-Yi was not simple. However, he knew his own disciple the best. At least, that brat Su-Yi was not enough to be his disciple's true opponent for the time being. He said to Yun Lingfeng, "You have to pay attention to that girl called Mu Yao. Her background is not simple." Mu Yao. Yun Lingfeng's eyes moved slightly. How could he not know her? There was no ranking in the Sword Pagoda. Her strength had always been a mystery. However, he did not care about that. When he mentioned her name, there was a fluctuation in his heart. A graceful figure in orange appeared in his mind. However, she was the disciple of Elder Ouyang. She was obviously in front of him, but he could not reach her. That girl's background is mysterious. She was brought into the Shunjin Gate by by Elder Ouyang. In the entire Shunjian Gate, I am afraid that only the sect leader knows her identity. Elder by Mingshan frowned slightly. There were some things that even he, an elder, did not know. The night was hazy. However, the Divine Sword sect was unusually lively. The list of the 68 disciples who were qualified to set foot on Lingjian Peak for the final battle 3 days later had been announced, which shocked the entire Shunjian Gate. All the inner disciples and pro-disciples of this year were still immersed in shock. No one had expected that Su Yi would be the first, Sita Muyang would be the second, and Mu Yao would be the third. Before this, no one would have thought that these three names would occupy the top 3 of the 68 spots. And among the top 20, there were outer disciples such as Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and Lu Ji, which surprised people. Su Yi and Sita Muyang robbed so many people and collected a lot of sword pattern stones. Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and Lu Ji are all disciples of the 36 sword peak like Su Yi. The sword pattern stones must be from Su Yi. Some people speculated that the strength of Su Yi and Sita Muyang was beyond doubt, but Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and others must have gotten the sword pattern stones for free, which was why they occupied several places among the 68 places. In the final battle 3 days later, Su Jiahui, Zhang Qing, and others will not be opponents. Some disciples said, I heard that Sita Muyang is the son of the sect leader and has only recently returned to the Shunjian Gate. No wonder Sita Muyang is so young, but his cultivation is already so strong. There is a disciple called Mu Yao. I don't think I've heard of her before. I've seen Mu Yao before. She subdued an 8-winged demonic python in the battlefield of 10,000 swords. She is very strong. Among the 68 places this time, she is ranked 3rd, only below Su Yi and Sita Muyang. I accidentally heard that this Mu Yao is very mysterious in the sect. As the disciples walked out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords, the 68 places were announced. Sita Muyang, Mu Yao, and some other outstanding disciples immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. Some were happy, while others were sad. Many direct disciples, such as Pu Qingqing and Pu Hao, cursed in their hearts. Chapter 5:21. But because of Su Yi and Sita Muyang, they missed the opportunity. How could they not feel aggrieved? But at this moment, the happiest person in the Shunjian Gate was none other than Ho Changming. Protector Ho Changming, his new disciple, Zhang Qing, not only managed to enter the top 68, he even managed to enter the top 20. This inconceivable miracle had actually happened. In the courtyard residence, Ho Changming couldn't help laughing. When he thought of the expressions of Wang Tianbao and Zhu Changgao when they finally knew the result, he felt very happy. This time, he won a lot of high-rank star-grade elixirs, which were enough to make Ho Changming's value dozens of times. The most important thing was that he could make those protectors speechless, which made Ho Changming feel very happy. Master, what are you laughing at? Seeing this, a disciple felt very strange. His master, who always looked serious, was very abnormal today. Nothing. By the way, go and clean a room. Your junior brother will come in a few days. You must clean it up, Ho Changming said with a smile. His new disciple broke into the top 20, which made him unprecedentedly in the limelight. Thinking about it, he was very excited. Well, I'll go now. The disciple nodded and was also very happy. His junior brother broke into the top 68 and made the limelight. This made his senior brother, who had never seen him, feel proud. Wang Tianbao, I'm not finished with you. Zhu Changgao, did you discuss it? You cheated us of so many elixirs. At this moment, in the middle of the night, Wang Tianbao and Zhu Changgao were still surrounded by a group of protectors. One by one, the protectors were incomparably indignant. Everyone had lost. Although 10 high-grade star-grade medicinal pills were not enough to bankrupt these protectors, when these protectors carefully thought about it, all of this seemed to be a scam. They suspected that all of this had been discussed by Zhu Zhanggao, Protector Wang Tianbao, and Protector Ho Changming. We really didn't know. Who knew that an outer disciple could really break into the top 68? At this moment, Wang Tianbao and Zhu Zhongyao, the two enforcers, were crying miserably. They were even more wrong than Dou Yi. Who would have thought that Ho Changming's luck would be so good? An outer disciple actually broke into the top 68. This was an inconceivable miracle. On EB's square root cool craftsmen, when they confirmed the news, they were all dumbfounded. The night passed. Su Yi was bathed in the light of dawn. He brandished the sword in his hand, slashing diagonally. His movements were simple, but he repeated them over and over again until he was dripping with sweat. After resting for 2 hours and adjusting his breathing, Su Yi continued to practice the basics of the sword. This continued until dusk. After sweating profusely again, Su Yi continued to rest and recover. The movements were simple, and he practiced them over and over again. Although it was extremely boring, Su Yi knew that these basic skills would be of great use to him. Night once again covered the sky, and the new moon hung high in the sky. Huff, huff. Su Yi continued to practice the basics, repeating the simple movements over 10,000 times. The basics are very important. Don't underestimate a sword. A faint voice came, and a short figure appeared not far away, slowly walking over. It was Elder Su. Elder Su. Su Yi stopped practicing and held the sword in his hand. There was a look of surprise in his eyes. Elder Su actually came. Elder Su didn't pay much attention to him and went straight to Su Yi. He reached out his hand and took the sword from Su Yi's hand. With a flick of his wrist, the sword body shook. Instantly, the sword began to move. It was either a stab, a flick, a point, or a slash. At the same time, he said, the sword has to be piercing, slashing, lifting, slashing, stirring, and washing. The stab has to be swift and violent. The point has to be straightforward. The belt has to be sharp. The swipe has to be flexible. The draw has to be steady. The hang has to be close. The strike has to be majestic. The flick has to be pulled. And the cut has to be on the wrist. When the last word was said, Elder Su's hand movements also stopped, and he threw the sword back to Su Yi. Thank you, Elder Su, for your guidance. Su Yi received the sword, and he was a little excited. This was clearly Elder Su guiding him. I'm not in the mood to guide you. I'm just bored. Continue practicing. Elder Su glanced at Su Yi and then sat down not far away. He said to Su, I have nothing to do anyway. You can continue practicing. Yes. Su Yi chuckled and continued practicing. The treasured sword in his hand was either chopping, stabbing, or flipping. It was dull and tedious, but Su Yi did not slack off in the slightest. He was completely immersed in it. Elder Su's gaze flickered for a moment before returning to normal. As the saying goes, the saber is like a ferocious tiger, and the sword is like the wind. You know how to use a saber, but you should know that a sword and a saber are not the same. To practice the sword, you need to train your eyes. Sword moves all rely on your eyes. Your eyes are as sharp as lightning. It was unknown when Elder Su had started speaking. Su Yi was immersed in his practice. With Elder Su's guidance, he became more and more serious. Another night passed, and Su Yi stopped sweating profusely. He planned to rest for a while before continuing. Thank you, Elder Su. Su Yi arrived in front of Elder Su and bowed respectfully. Looking at your basic skills, they are really sloppy and ordinary. You said you came from a barbarian city. Is it the barbarian city at the end of the barbarian demon forest? Elder Su's gaze was calm as he looked at Su Yi. But at this moment, Elder Su's heart was still shaken. This kid's comprehension ability was not ordinary. It was simply abnormal. Even if he only gave a slight reminder, this kid would be able to draw inferences and connect the dots. Elder Su had been observing for a day and a night. He did not know why, but he could not help but run out and say a few words. With Elder Su's eyesight, how could he not see that Su Yi did not look like he had teacher? Many of his basic skills were sloppy and ordinary, but his cultivation and age made him secretly shocked. Su Yi's talent was not ordinary. At such a young age, he had already reached such a level. He suppressed many direct disciples of the Xinjiang Gate. However, he did not have any arrogance. He was also tenacious in the boring basic skills. This made Elder Sue's heart moved. If this kind of youth was given guidance, his future would be limitless in the future. Yes, I came from Barbarian City. Sui nodded and did not hide anything. It's not easy for a youngster like you to come out from such a remote place. Your talent is ordinary, but you have your own talent. It's not easy. Remember, you have to progress step by step in the future. Elder Sue said in a calm tone. Sui nodded and listened carefully. I can feel that some of your other basic skills are also very sloppy and ordinary. Could it be that you have never cultivated when you were young? Chapter 522. When I was young, there was a small problem with my body that prevented me from cultivating. 4 years ago, by chance, I was able to embark on the path of cultivation. Sui bitterly smiled. At that time, he didn't know why he couldn't cultivate. Later, he found out that it was because of the mysterious space in his body that he couldn't store yuan qi. Calculating the time, it wasn't until 4 years ago that he was able to truly cultivate. For years, Elder Sue was once again moved. If this kid had only cultivated for 4 years and had already reached such a level, then how terrifying was his speed? Some basic skills are very important. They will be of great use to you in the future. Elder Sue said. Sui nodded. He knew that he was lacking in many basic skills. Taking advantage of the fact that Elder Sue seemed to be in a good mood, he naturally wouldn't let go of this opportunity to ask for advice. Elder Sue's face was cold, but he didn't reject Sui. One humbly asked for advice. The other pretended to be indifferent as he guided. Time slowly passed like this. At dusk, large fiery clouds covered the sky. It's about time. Don't bite off more than you can chew. Prepare well. Tomorrow is the day of the peak showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly. Do your best. Elder Sue got up and stretched. This kid will definitely do his best. I will definitely take first place. Sui smiled. He was looking forward to the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly tomorrow. As for first place, not to mention the generous rewards, if he couldn't even defeat the younger generation of Shenzhen Gate, then how could he go to the Sacred Mountain one day? His gaze was firm and flashed with a red light. For Sui, the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly tomorrow was also the first time he had truly tested himself since the Barbarian Demon Forest. You will definitely take first place. You have some arrogance, but I don't know how strong you are. Elder Sue faintly rolled his eyes at Sui. He knew a thing or two about the strength of the younger generation of Shenzhen Gate. The kid in front of him was indeed not simple in all aspects, but he was still young after all, and still had some shortcomings. In the future, he might be able to compete, but now it was not certain. I will definitely take first place. Sui's gaze was resolute. Since he was already participating in the Myriad Sword Conference, he would do his best. The night passed, and the next morning, when the first ray of light from the eastern horizon shone on the Shenzhen Gate, the entire Shenzhen Gate was filled with densely packed figures, walking out from all directions. Some of them unleashed their yuan qi, while others rode on their savage beasts. All of them were heading toward a certain place. The sky gradually brightened. Today's weather was clear, and the air was also accompanied by the fragrance of flowers, making people feel refreshed. Today was the grand occasion of the Shenzhen Gate. The Myriad Sword Assembly, which was held once every 5 years, was the true climax. The 68 disciples who had obtained the quotas would have their final showdown. Just thinking about it made people excited. Handyman disciples, outer disciples, inner disciples, and even pro-disciples had also appeared in various places early in the morning, heading towards the Spirit Sword Peak. Today's final showdown, the true climax of the entire Myriad Sword Assembly, would be on the Spirit Sword Peak. Sui returned to his room. Today was the final showdown of the Myriad Sword Assembly, so he did not dare to be careless. He had to be prepared and maintain his peak state. Phew! After adjusting his breathing to the best state, Sui opened his eyes. There was a ray of red light flickering in his eyes, and the aura on his body slightly rippled, lifting his gray robe. He sat up and stretched his body. His bones emitted a crackling sound, as if they were filled with an explosive feeling. He felt the state of his body. The corners of Su Yi's mouth curled into a satisfied smile. Today would be a true test to see how far he had come. Suddenly, Su Yi's eyes moved, and with his sharp soul power, he felt that someone was coming. Big brother Su Yi. Immediately, Su Jiahui's voice came from the door. Su Yi walked out of the courtyard and saw Su Jiahui. She seemed to be preparing for today. Today, the little girl had changed into a light blue robe, which outlined her already exquisite figure even more attractive. Her face was delicate and pretty, and her complexion was crystal clear. Her big black eyes were as clear as water, and her skin was as smooth as snow. There was a small dimple on her cheek, and in her hands were several robes and a pair of cloud boots. Seeing Su Yi, Su Jiahui showed a bit of shyness and said, "I see that your robe is already torn. Today we're going to the Spirit Sword Peak, so it would be better to clean it up a bit. I guess I made 2 sets for you. Try them on and see if they fit. If the size is not right, we can change them." "Thank you." Su Yi smiled and did not refuse. The robe he was wearing really could not be worn anymore. He took the robe from Su Jiahui's hands and went back to his room to change. A moment later, Su Yi walked out again. He was wearing a blue robe embroidered with some exquisite patterns and a pair of cloud boots. They fit him very well, as if they were tailor-made. Su Yi liked them very much, and it was his favorite blue color. It seemed that Su Jiahui, this little girl, had put a lot of thought into them. A blade and a sword alternated on his back. His black hair swayed slightly. His face was sharp and resolute, and his eyes were resolute. He looked at Su Jiahui and said, "It fits very well, thank you." Looking at Su Yi, Su Jiahui's eyes were a bit dazed. It turned out that this guy, whose fierce reputation spread far and wide, after dressing up a bit, was actually so handsome. Hearing Su Yi's voice, Su Jiahui came back to her senses. She smiled at Su Yi and said, "No need to thank me. If it weren't for you, I'm afraid we wouldn't have been able to walk out of the battlefield of 10,000 swords. If there's anyone to thank, it should be us." Su Jiahui was very clear that the reason she and Zhang Qing had their current cultivation and transformation was all because of Su Yi. All kinds of opportunities and good fortune could change their lives. "Don't be so courteous." Su Yi smiled. Looking at this girl in front of him, she was becoming more and more like Wan Er. After being out for so long, he did not know how Wan Er was doing. At this moment, his heart was also somewhat worried. Gee, there was a shrill sound. Not far away, a vicious bird flapped its wings and flew over, circling at a low altitude. Gale Golden Eagle. Su Yi was surprised. It was the Gale Golden Eagle that he had brought back from the torture chamber disciple. He originally thought that it would eventually return to the torture chamber, but he did not expect it to come back. "We should go. Everyone is waiting for you," Su Jiahui said to Su Yi. Today, they were all going to Lingjian Peak, so they could not be late. Su Yi nodded. After Su Jiahui left, it only took a short while for them to arrive at the place where Zhang Qing, Lu Ji, and the others were waiting. X-positive. P version A hair. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.